Hello, Chantal.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Jumping with my boys, sit in the city. Jumping with my boys, sit in the city. Mr. President of the DJ.
Good morning.
Hey, Ray, how are you?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Good. Sit up here.
There we go. Morning, Chantel. We're recording already.
We don't want to miss a single moment. All right. Are you running this, or is Chantel running the just the tech side? Because I have a.
Usually Eugene runs it. So.
Oh, okay. Wait till he shows up here. Because I have a cool piece of software that lets me just do my slides right next to my face.
Oh.
I don't share anything, but people have to set it for, speaker view and stuff like that. So. Yeah, it's cool. It works right through the camera.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I've been trying to change up the experience a little bit than just, the classic like little thumbnail face with a big slide. So. But you got a full morning here, right?
Good. I saw you had I guess it was you that asked for the link for the session today, so I assume I got it to you quickly.
Yeah, Eugene sent it to me. Yeah, I didn't have it anywhere. So it's like, what?
I awoke. We have the elections today, and I turned on my laptop that had done an update, and realized that the file I had put all the candidates on had been deleted as part of the update. So I was like, oh, I got to get that put back together.
How's that happen?
Really? Well, if you just use Notepad, it doesn't save.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. Oh, I'll just do this quick and dirty thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then update, and then it's gone.
I've only been using computers for, I don't know,
ever
1973. So when the big problem was, oh, you dropped the box of cards and you didn't sequence the cards. Oh,
that was well.
Usually you have more people joining in, but I'm kind of like you. I usually join, a couple minutes early just to make sure. Oh, here
we go.
Eugene. Good morning, Eugene.
Flood in here. Hello, Eugene. Frozen.
Yeah. There you're moving.
We go.
I woke up this morning, Eugene. I had put all the ballot, if you will, on the on Notepad, and then Microsoft did an update. It was like, oh, I didn't save that. So I put it back. I put it back together. We're okay, but
that's all right. That's what happens to half the drop-in mail ballots here in Philadelphia. Anyway, they mysteriously No, I'm kidding. Or so some people claim. No, actually, we had an incident in Philadelphia that was incredibly confusing. The Urban League of Philadelphia put up a ad for voting, for mail-in voting. Well, they put it on bus shelters, they put it on various places, and one of the places they put it on is the Big Bellies. So in the city, we have these big bellies. They kind of have a handle.
Oh,
that's open
no.
up a little bit. Well, it was brought to their attention that the thing looks a heck of a lot like a ballot box, a drop box. And it says vote on it. So they had to go dumpster diving to see how. Yeah. So it's okay. Crisis averted. I don't think we have a contested election, right?
No, we don't. We have a full ballot, so that's, which is good.
Right.
So just, one new VP who, luckily we got her a link to today's meeting. And
That's always good.
so
I have when I go on, I don't need to share my screen. What I have is the ability to do this. So just have my slides right in the same
Okay. Yeah.
as my face. So if you spotlight me or pin me or whatever it is in Zoom that makes me kind of the main presenter during that time, that would be great. And then I just go back out of it. So.
Yeah. I think it all depends on how everybody's Zoom is set.
Yeah. So I'll kind of remind them to set me for speaker view and that sort of thing. But this works out well. This kind of
nice. I like it.
Yeah, and I'll send a PDF of the presentation afterwards that you can distribute to everybody. I saw 25 minutes, right? So I'll hit I got a timer. Make sure I stick to
that. I think it's somewhat flexible.
Okay.
when you hear the gong, you've gone too long.
When my screen suddenly goes black. The meeting has ended for you.
I
don't want to get too controversial, but I brought my Fetterman shirt. There we go.
There you go.
A Connecticut fan.
Well, good morning, Dan Wilson. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Ray. I haven't seen you in ages.
Oh, I know. Where are you at now?
I work for Temple University.
Okay. Cool. I just started a contract with Signet Jewelers. They're putting in a customer data platform. So that'll be fun.
Well, I have most of the speakers on. I might as well make sure you are okay with the recording taking place. And assuming the cloud storage doesn't run out, I'll try to post it to our social media channels, if that's okay. All right, good. It's impressive how everybody just right at the dot, We have the in-person meetings, you show up early for refreshments.
Yeah, plus we're all on Zoom, so we're just getting out of our 8 a.m. meeting.
Yeah, now it's 8, 9, 10. Go.
Right, they're pouring in here.
That's better. Is that better? That's better.
Good morning, Samantha.
Good morning. How are you?
Just wonderful. Yourself?
Good, thanks.
So I think we probably have good chapter representation to do elections first. What do you think, Ray?
If that's what you want to do.
I don't think there's a preference. I was going for whenever we had the most folks.
Yeah, I mean, I was concerned that if we waited to the end, we'd have people drop off. I can, if you want, I'll read the names out just as a pro forma.
Yeah.
So,
and then hold on. Is my my internet good? Yeah. So Ray is our past president, who is charged with doing our elections and is a neutral party to this process because I think you've served on the board enough at this point that your aspirations are not clouding your ability to serve in the nominating committee.
well, actually, I'm not completely neutral. One of my goals is not to get elected to anything.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's even better. It doesn't always work. I will warn you.
Anyways.
So yeah, go ahead. If you want to run down the list of interested parties, and we have a staggering approach to our board that gets us gradual turnover, and half of our positions are up every year. So we have the odd year positions.
I thought you were saying we had a staggering board that after the happy hour, after the meetings, we actually meet in person.
Oh yeah, and with an odd bunch of characters. Yeah, that's another way to read it. Yeah.
So, anyways, so we have 5 positions up this year, and we basically have most of the people, returning to the board. The VP for somebody is on. Barry? Janelle? Janelle, could you mute, please?
I'm actually hold on, I'm actually not logged in as the host, I think. Give me a second.
So just to kind of show you an overview,
I'm getting there. Hold on.
Since we revised our timeline back in February, so most of you will remember that we had originally had to go live in October due to a lot of reasons. The bill was not going to be complete by then. We took, did a revision of the schedule, pushed towards a date in February, and split out a QR to go live in April.
Okay, thank you, Eugene. So anyways, we have most of the people returning, which includes the VP for Internal Communications, Stan Taylor, the VP for Programs, Chantel Rassicot, Online Services, Greg Plummer, Membership Services, John Hawbaugh, and new to the board, thank you very much for volunteering, is Samantha Schatz. So I'd like to move that we, unless there are any other late additions, that we accept this by acclamation.
I move that we go ahead and do that.
Okay, I just moved.
Oh, I second that we go ahead and do it. I'm sorry.
Anybody opposed? So be it. Thank you.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah. Only one more of these to go for me.
Yeah. Well, there's always a way to get someone else to help out too. All right. Well, I wanted to go ahead and kick off our main program with Scott Taylor, aka the Data Whisperer, telling your data story. Scott, I think you've been speaking with other DAMA chapters recently, and we have had you here before, so we're glad to welcome you back as well. I think the last time you were here, it was hosted by our president at the time, Stacy, and our chapter mascot, DAMA Phil, if anybody remembers DAMA Phil. And, there was a mascot that came along, not to steal your thunder, but they hit it off as well as the humans did. So that was good. So Scott, it's really good to have you back with us. And I wanted to remind everybody to, we are not using the webinar version of Zoom. This is just, everybody's equal in a grid. So when Scott presents, if you click and pin him to make him bigger, that would make for a more enjoyable presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Eugene. So if I'm all pinned there, I'm taking your entire screen. Good morning, everybody. Scott Taylor, Data Whisperer. I'm thrilled to be here. As you can see by my slide, hopefully everybody can see my slide and so on there. Since I can't go anywhere, I can be everywhere. And as Eugene mentioned, I'm up to 30 DAMA chapters worldwide that I am either have spoken to or will be speaking to. So this is great. I've got Norway this afternoon. I did Poland and Houston yesterday. So it's spectacular in terms of cutting down on the travel. And as you mentioned, yes, I was there before, familiar with DAMA Phil. There he is. Stacy and I and Phil went out to dinner. I did a nice interview, which is on YouTube, with DAMA Phil and Stacy, and was at Houston Hall in the Hall of Flags last time in September of 2019, I think, presenting to the group. But here we are in this digital world, happy to do it this way. So a couple of things, as Eugene already mentioned, please mute, spotlight me, or pin me, because I've got my slides next to my face rather than sharing a webinar. Questions in the chat, which I will not pay attention to until the end if we've got some time to do that. Feel free to post. Hey, I've got a very healthy ego. No problem if you want to take a screenshot or you like this and you want to post. And the recording and the presentation will be available when we're all done. Before I get too far, I want to thank my sponsors. First of all, Wind Shuttle, who sponsored me on this worldwide tour, a great provider of MDM and PIM, and do a great amount of work with process automation, integrating right into SAP, as well as a wonderful consulting group out of the UK, the Comma Group, who works specifically and only on MDM projects. So if you're looking for that kind of consulting piece that's really focused and helps you with things like the cultural side of MDM and master data, they're a great group. But I really want to thank both of them. I do content for them, amplify their messages. I'm a brand ambassador. We do a lot of great work together. So thrilled that they were able to kind of fund this activity to share my thoughts with you today. So every enterprise has a data story to tell, and it is about why data management is of strategic importance. You know that. I know that. But the people who aren't on this call, the people sometimes you report to, the people on the business side, those executive stakeholders, those C-level leadership, they don't always know that. They don't always understand it. So I'm here today to help you tell that story. why what we do in DAMA and why what you do as data practitioners and data leaders is so vitally important to your enterprise. For one reason, you need more support. You need more involvement. You need more ownership, and you need more money. I will say it right out there. You need more funding for data management, especially versus some of the sexier, hotter stuff like data science and AI and all these other things that get, as far as I'm concerned, a disproportionate amount of attention, funding, and support versus what we do in the data management side. So I'm going to over-rotate on our part of the space on purpose because I want to help you tell that story. Right away, what's up with the truth hat here? I say in data, you've got to determine the truth first before you derive meaning. Obviously, I'm on the truth team, hence the meaning of my truth hat. That truth, which we maintain, which we structure, which we handle. You can handle the truth with data governance, data management, MDM, and so on, versus deriving meaning, which comes out of business intelligence and analytics. It's not chicken or egg here. It is egg and omelet. You've got to have truth first in data before you derive meaning from it. It's the way it always goes. And this is nothing personal here. So some people kind of take a little umbrage with this concept of finding truth because they're on this personal journey. This is not about your personal development. This is about business. It's about commercial activity. There's truth in that, and we've got to establish it for our organizations. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about my data story, why you should even listen to me, why you need a data story for data management, the relevance of data management given all the macro trends that are going on. Some people even think, well, why do we even need it anymore? We have data engineers, we have data ops. Do we need data management? The types of data storytelling, there are two now as far as I'm concerned. And then leveraging what I call the 3 V's with a knowing wink to the 3 V's of big data: vocabulary, voice, and vision. And I'll wrap it up with an example that puts it all in play. Everything I'm talking about is available in my book. So hopefully we'll be giving away a book to some lucky listener here today, but it's certainly available online and at Amazon and so on. And I don't pretend to help you with the data management part. You know that. You're experts in that. What I want to do is give you possibly a new way to talk about what you already know. If we don't speak to the business in business accessible language, they will not understand us. And one of the biggest challenges and problems, if I say it so clearly, in the entire data space is the way we talk about it. It's the words we use. It's the buzzwords that cloud our approach. It's the metaphors we struggle and debate with. We've got to speak in clearer language, get to the point to get that funding. As I mentioned, wrote a book, Telling Your Data Story, data storytelling for data management. You can see right on the front there, it is 99% buzzword free. That's a guarantee I can guarantee. I didn't want to overpromise there, so I didn't want to say 100%. A must read for anybody who needs funding for data management. One of my favorite reviews in Amazon. It is actually the #1 data book in Amazon in performing arts. Now, through some sort of bizarre Amazon AI-based categorization process, I was put in several categories, including the performing arts category. I ranked as high as 193. I checked it out, and all the other books are about music and dancing and acting. That makes me, this book, the #1 data book in performing arts. See, you can make analytics do whatever you want, can't you? And I am the why, not the how. You need both, but we're going to push a lot and talk a lot about the why. I don't know a business stakeholder or a CEO who cares about the how until they understand the why. And I spent my career representing in sales and marketing some iconic world-class data brands, Nielsen, Dun & Bradstreet, WPP, and Kantar, helping them position and tell better stories about the fundamental foundational data content they have, taxonomy assets, helping productize those, master data as a service, reference data, metadata provided from third parties. And what this gave me was an experience to talk to every kind of company at every level of maturity all over the world and help bring to you kind of the common themes, the common practices, the goals, the challenges, the obstacles that I found everywhere. Because at this foundational level, those things are more the same than they are different. And hopefully I can share that with you. I provide today what I call data evangelism as a service, a way to get enterprises and tech brands excited about the power and value of what we do in data management. I do a ton of content. If you haven't seen it yet, you got to check out at least my puppet. He met DAMA Phil, but my puppets, the puppets of data, they did a video last year, Too Much Tech Talk. I've got two of my friends on my hands there, the CDO, the Chief Dog Officer, as well as the ITB who speaks only in buzzwords. I've got a cartoon with the superhero backstory of master data, as well as some bad data ideas you're going to want to avoid. So check me out on YouTube. And spoiler alert, in case you haven't noticed, I don't do a whole lot of whispering. We save that for the data to help calm it down. We've got to sell, yell, and tell about the power of data management. I've got some wonderful accolades. I'm data god of data whispering, according to Cracktos, the #1 thought leader in big data, according to Thinkers 360. I just recently hosted a 24 or 26.2 hour round the clock, around the world master data marathon with a group called Think Linkers. And I was recently put on the who's who of data management by Analytical. So I figure I must know what I'm talking about. And probably like a lot of you, I think I'm kind of hardwired for the data management, taxonomy, ontology part of the space, because my parents told me as a kid, instead of building with my Lego, I sorted it. So I'm sure you were block sorters when you were kids too. That's why you're in this part of the business. We need Lego builders, but we also need the sorters. So it takes both sides. Anyway, if you hear that phone ring and it's mine, it'll go away soon. It's probably someone trying to sell me an extended car warranty. What inspired me to write the book is I listened to all this talk about data science, data literacy, data storytelling, and I said to myself, where is the voice of data management? I don't hear it. Data scientists talk all the time about how they spend 60 to 120% of their time munging and wrangling data. Have they met us yet? Why do they spend that time? Where is the voice of data management? So again, with my ability to just scream and yell about it and tell a better story, I really wanted to support the work we do and have it at least be a peer to the folks on the analytics side. So I take a rather, tongue-in-cheek, somewhat good-hearted, competitive stance against our folks on the analytics and BI side, because I think, as I mentioned, they get a disproportionate amount of the support. Now, a couple of great DAMA leaders out there, if you know them, John Landley and Tom Redmond wrote a post in Dataversity last year, which is a site that I also blog for. And their headline was, "Data Management Has Failed." And in there, they said, as a community, we have failed to educate leaders and craft messages that people will listen to. Now, I wrote a response the next month and said, well, data management hasn't failed, but data management storytelling has. Let's not kill the messengers. Let's fix the messaging. So data management messaging is very hard to listen to, and an overwhelming majority of data management programs suffer from an inability to demonstrate and then communicate business alignment. That's two things: demonstrate and communicate. You got to do it, then you got to tell people about it in a way that they can understand, ongoing. So it's just like evangelism. You got to get people to believe, then you got to get them to practice, and we got to tell a better story. A little more validation here. Oh, well, fun fact, our blogs ranked number 9 and 10 last year. So it was obviously, this theme was resonating with a lot of readers of Dataversity. A little more validation. McKinsey posted this as well in 2026 ways to drive data governance excellence. And I looked at these 6 and went, okay, 3 of them: securing top management attention, integrating with primary transformational themes, and generating excitement about data. You can't do that unless you tell a good story. This is not about sharing your reference data architecture. This is about getting into the hearts and minds of those leaders that really, they kind of nod yes on the outside, but they're nodding off on the inside when we talk about the stuff we've got to do. If we look at the big macro trends out there, and there's plenty of them, whether it's e-commerce, if people jumped into last year, as a service offerings, know your customer, KYC, data privacy regulations, ABM, the Internet of Things, digital transformation, the 4th industrial revolution, all these big themes are the primary transformational themes that our leaders are thinking about. And where's data management in all this? Well, I'd suggest to you, none of them happen without it. They all take technology. Technology needs hardware, software, data. Data needs data management. So my feeling is data management is macro trend agnostic. No matter what these bubbles were filled with 5 years ago, or what they are today, or where they are in the next 5 or 10 years, it is always going to need data management. We are macro trend agnostic. You're welcome to quote me on that. So the truth about data management is the value of every digitally transformative customer experience, every as-a-service offering, every foray into e-commerce, every enterprise software implementation is inextricably linked to the successful output of your data management efforts. No two ways about it. That's just a really fancy, highfalutin way to just say GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, rubbish in, rubbish out. This overused cliche doesn't drive the action we think it does. So when your explanation of why that analytics toolkit didn't work is just simply, well, GIGO, are people taking action on that? No, we've got to elevate this conversation. Maybe it's goodness in, goodness out, but I like to think of it as the golden rule of data. Do unto your data as you would have it do unto you. What you put in is what you get out. What you put into data management is what you get out of business intelligence. So if you put bad data into ERP, you get a lousy ERP. You put bad data into CRM, you get missed customer opportunities. Bad data into fintech, you might get a visit from the regulators. Bad data into ML, bad robots. Bad data into AI, AS, artificial stupidity. Bad data into BI, BS. Really, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you dice it, the golden rule of data prevails. Do unto your data as you would have it do unto you. Which reminds me again, good decisions you make on bad data are just bad decisions you don't know about yet. So we've got to watch and make sure we determine that truth first before we derive any meaning from it. Now, on the topic of today, data storytelling, probably the hottest non-technical thing going on in the data space today. There's a ton of activity about it and lots of books about data storytelling. And every one of them, until I wrote one, is about analytics, about business intelligence. But we've got to have one for our side as well, on the data management side. So 2 types of stories here that let me take you through. That business intelligence analytics story is about deriving meaning from data, data literacy, data science, machine learning, visualization, putting data into a business process to drive action. Super important. We've all got to understand that across our enterprise. But on the data management side, we have to tell the story about determining the truth. We have to tell the story about data governance, data quality, data ownership, master data, reference data, MDM, RDM, PIM, DAM, all these foundational activities that create that trusted content that can flow into those analytics activities. So these 2 types of data storytelling here, one with data, using it, but the other kind of data storytelling about the data and making it. So these 2 types, you don't have to choose. It's not Sophie's choice here. We need both. But my push is there is a second type, another type, which is as important as the data storytelling with data. So when you start your data story, how does it start? Who are you? Are you Hans Christian Andersen or are you Don Draper? Do you start with once there once was some ugly data, or do you really try to pitch this thing? Well, I'll tell you, it is not a fable. It is a pitch. When you tell the story about why data management is so important to your enterprise, you are trying to drive and secure business action and activity. Don't tell your life story. Don't tell your technical story. Tell the business-oriented story that is a pitch. You've got to secure a commitment afterwards. And I got lots of sales tips in the book about how to do that. Maybe you start your data story with data management story with some insightful data from one of the top analysts. Here's one of my favorite polls that Gartner did. Organizations measuring the value of master data, 90% said, no, we do not measure it. 10% said other. I'm assuming yes is in that other. Or do you start with the terminology we're also familiar with in the MDM and data management space? We need a golden record, you say to your CEO who thinks, well, that sounds expensive. Watch the words you use. We all know what that means. But don't expect business people to know what that means. And if you want to spend the first 5 minutes explaining what your new terminology is, you've wasted those first 5 minutes. Get to the business-oriented point. You start it this way. Here it is. Here's our data model. It all works. We map the IDs and we've got the common hierarchies. We've got structural elements in here. It all comes together. This is 100% how. This is the physical level. They don't care about that. If you show this to your CEO, you probably get kicked out of the meeting. It's important. You've got to do it. I'm not saying you don't, but today we're talking about the why, not the how. So your data story begins with the essence of your business. What is the purpose of your business? Why does your business exist? Again, I've had the fortunate experience to be able to talk to every kind of company out there, and summing it all up and distilling it down, I found that all businesses are trying to provide value to their relationships through their brands at scale.
Bill Burr, balance due, ACP.
All right, well, there we go. Okay, thank you. Now let me repeat that. That's what you want to do. Think about it in the essence of your business. You're trying to provide value to your relationships through your brands at scale. And it's the at scale part that's our opportunity. Scale means technology, hardware, software, data needs data management. The value you bring. How do you grow the business? How do you improve the business? How do you protect the business? Increase sales, operational efficiency, mitigate risk. The beauty of the kind of data management work we do is sometimes the same data can help you do all three if it's managed properly. Now, to make this relevant to your business, you've got to fill in the blanks. So when you think about relationships, what do you call them? Customer, vendor, partner, prospect, consumer, citizen, patient. Those are the types of relationships you might have depending on what sector or vertical you're in. We all call them different things, but they're all relationships. And if you don't have relationships, you don't have a business. And when we say brand, what do we mean by that? It could be product, service, offering, location, banner. It could be a finished good that's made up of materials and ingredients. It could be as a service, digitally delivered offering, but it's always a brand. Every enterprise has relationships and they have brands. And if you're in the MDM part of the space, I'm sure you recognize already those blue and green words are classic master data domains. So if you want to provide value to relationships through your brands at scale, you got to take a look and say, okay, how's the data we have on that stuff? Probably not that good. Probably doesn't fulfill those promises. So trying to directly connect what you do in the data management side around things like MDM for these domains to the strategic intention of your enterprise. Now, digital transformation, just touching on this really briefly, that is a way that people provide value to their relationships through their brands at scale. It's about people, process, tech, and data. I'm going to focus on data's part in digital transformation, especially the data management part. Again, this is a way to talk about it. And hopefully this resonates with your situation and you can share it with your stakeholders as well. So every organization starts in this idea of a legacy state, multiple silos, sales, marketing, finance, operations, different systems, different prevailing activities support those departments. Legacy doesn't necessarily mean old. Somebody even mentioned they're opening up a new CDP next week. If you do that, you may create a brand new silo and a new definition of customer. So you got to move from a legacy state to an integrated enterprise and become relationship centric, putting the most important things in your business at the center of what you do, both systematically and strategically. Customer 360, product 360, centricity, the geometry works for me. But it's the point is integrated across your enterprise. Everybody gets the right data at the right time in the right context and can trust it to make those decisions. Now that's great. That's great internally, but you got to move outside your own organization into what I call a trust network through connected ecosystems. How do you partner? How do you integrate? How do you interoperate with other parties across your value chain? Now, the universal requirements to move from a legacy state to integrated enterprise to connected ecosystems, to go from silos to centric to network are two things: authenticated identity and a common data structure. Now, that's certainly well within the scope of what
data management is supposed to provide for an organization. Authenticating the identity of entities. Is this relationship something I can trust? Do I have it already? Is it a duplicate? Did I search before create? Is it trying to deceive me? All those questions you have when you validate an entity of any type. And then is there a common data structure that you can use to share or link to or integrate with other parties? Again, this is not something you're going to design off of. It's a way to talk about it to senior business leadership. Now, when you have that, what do you get? That's where you get scale. That's the biggest byproduct of all of this, is the ability to do things at scale. Now, a couple great examples of trust networks that work off of authenticated identity and common data structure. The top icons there, those disruptors we all know, Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, they all work off of highly structured, well-governed, expertly mastered data underneath. We all know that. Just because you push your thumb on a screen doesn't mean something happens unless the data is there to back it up. Let's think about a common example that's in every store, the UPC, the Universal Product Code, the G10. That little barcode on every bottle, box, bag, jar, tube in every store. You bring one of those packages up to the front of the store and it goes beep across the cash register. That little beep, that's authenticating identity right there. And even something that might appear as legacy as design and color. Do you know the PMS, the Pantone matching system? They have unique identifiers and a way to share the formulation of different colors. This goes back decades. This was back in the printing press days when most of it was done that way, that designers could share a common set of color. So designs worked. So lots and lots of examples, but these are all trust networks. These are all connected ecosystems. They all run off of authenticated identity and a data structure. No matter what business you're in, if you're trying to do this kind of stuff, you've got to have it. So the 3 V's here, I might go slightly long. I got about another 5 or 7 minutes. The 3 V's of data storytelling: vocabulary. You want to establish an accessible vocabulary, harmonize to a common voice, and illuminate the business vision. So this first V, the words you use are important. We've got to get rid of the legacy lexicon in the space. For whatever reason, the most important one is it's not working. Data quality, super important. All of you work on it. We got to have high quality data, but it doesn't sell. Somebody's got to tell you that. Might feel like a little bit of heresy there, but when you go up and say, our top initiative is to improve data quality, never said a CEO. That's not what they're thinking about. Data quality is emotional, it's subjective, everybody has an opinion. And even if you think it's a big goal of yours, why? Why? Focus on the why. You want higher, better data quality so it enables other things. Point at those other things. And get rid of words like cleansing and freshness and hygiene. Again, these classic legacy words we use in the space. You want to clear a room of business stakeholders? Tell them we're launching a data hygiene program. They'll go running for the door. These words don't capture anybody's imagination. They don't sound like business building words. Use strategic, action-oriented words, like we need a common structure. We need to set a standard. We need interoperability with our partners. Those types of active, strategic words that drive business. And think about the enterprise terminology you have for your relationships, for your offerings, for your hierarchies, your segmentations, your geographies. I've got a couple of videos called the 4 C's of master data, the 4 C's of entity ontology, if you will: code, company, category, country. But you think about those, think about identifiers, think about hierarchies, think about segmentation, think about geographies, and think about what you do in your business that doesn't include those. Almost everything. And that's the common vocabulary. And use your industry nomenclature. Every industry, every vertical's got a glossary out there about the specifics of their business. A lot of people call their relationships customers, but if you're a law firm, it's a client. If you're in healthcare, it's a patient. It's still relationships, but it makes specific sense to your vertical and your sector. And a little tip here: use your business glossary. If you've already done that hard work figuring out a common and standardized definition of customer, use it. You're operationalizing that work through these activities. Number 2, you want to harmonize to a common voice. Now, harmony doesn't mean everybody sings the same notes, but it does mean they all sound good together. So think about that elevator pitch. Can you describe and explain why data management is so important to your organization to your CEO in a minute? or 2 minutes or 5, you're not going to have an hour and a half. You got to be able to have that crisp, distinct explanation of why it is important. I have had CEOs interrupt me in the middle of a conversation and say, why are you telling me this? You got to be prepared to answer that question or answer it up front. That's what they are thinking about. You want to avoid these cliched false starts like data quality is our #1 objective. Data is the new oil. There's more data now than ever before. These things are not getting through. You want a consistent tone and tenor. You want to reflect your brand positioning and category. So if you're in the healthcare space, talk about data like you would talk about healthcare. High quality data. Data is the lifeblood of our organization. A healthy business works off of healthy data, whatever that analogy is. Just riffing here, but use what your company already understands. It is a shortcut to making the point. And another voice tip, seek out other storytellers in your organization, in sales, in marketing, in communications. There's people out there to help you. There's a lot of big organizations have a communications department in HR and marketing that's helping folks like you develop those soft skills. Take advantage of that. You got to be able to get up there and pitch against or versus sales and marketing. They tell stories for a living, so they're really good at it. Now, last one here, illuminate that business vision. What you do in data management must enable the strategic intentions of your enterprise. What are those? Listen to what your leaders say and listen for words about relationships and about brands. You'll find them in there. It's hard not to find them once you start to listen. And so a little tip here. What do your leaders say? If you can't find it, look at your annual report. Look at your strategy statement, your company meetings, the first couple slides. If you're a public company, an investor day presentation is an excellent source of this kind of stuff because they've put together, here's why we're going to grow. Here's where we're going to go. And you want to show how data management will enable it. It is in there. It is hidden in plain sight. Once you people recognize it, they see it everywhere, but it's your job to tease that out and show people they're not going to be able to make those strategic promises work unless they've got the data to back it up. So let's put it all in play here. One example, I know I'm going super fast, but the strategic intentions of the enterprise. Here's an example from an investor day presentation with a Fortune 200 company, kind of a collage of some of the points they made in there. So where's the vocabulary, voice, and vision? Let's see if we can find vision on here. It's right there. It says our vision to aspire to be the premier partner of choice for our customers and suppliers. Relationships, right there. Now, where's their voice? It's all in there. Customer engagement, enterprise effectiveness, brand management, grow, improve, and protect, differentiate customer experience, localize productivity and efficiency. They're laying it all out. It's right there. Digging into the other slides, you'll find that terminology. You'll find those initiatives. Nowhere in this presentation did they say anything about data quality, but it makes all this stuff work. And the vocabulary in those fast facts, 90 countries. Can you imagine all the ERP and CRM systems they have as they merged and acquired other companies? 800 suppliers, 100,000 customers, lots of codes, companies, categories, and countries throughout all of that. Now, they make this big promise, but you got to hit them with the data reality. And we did it actually as an exercise, took a look at the customer master for this company and found for one customer, as a single example, they had 185 duplicates. Those weren't ship tos. Those weren't different addresses. Nothing strategic about this. This stuff is a mess. This is the garbage in. You got to shame leadership and to realize they cannot aspire to be the premier partner of choice with Panasonic when they're dealing with this kind of crap. It just doesn't work. I'm sure you all have examples of it. So the words you use are important, the way you talk, and you've got to enable and show that vision, why it's important to your organization. And one last quote here I love. I picked this up the other day. The best arguments in the world won't change a person's mind, said Richard Powers. The only thing that can do that is a good story. So if you want to live happily ever after with your data management story, remember every enterprise has a data story to tell. It's about deriving or providing value to your relationships through your brands at scale. There's two types of data storytelling, one about the data for data management, determining the truth, and then one with data for business intelligence, deriving meaning. Data management is the foundation of digital transformation. It is macro trend agnostic. Leverage those 3 V's establish an accessible vocabulary, harmonize to a common voice, illuminate the business vision, and an effective narrative captures the hearts and minds of your business. It helps unify and motivate your team. The last page in my book, here's how it closes. Hardware comes and goes. Software comes and goes. Data remains. You'll always be relevant and important to your organization. They just have to understand why. All right, I'll take a breath there. Sorry, I went a little bit long, but hopefully we got some questions, and I'll close up with some other thoughts. But let's see if anybody's got any comments here. Yes, DAMA Phil was our sock. Yes, that's true. I noticed the hat. You bet. Baseball card sorter. That's good. AS, artificial stupidity, and BS. Yes, BIBS. Well said. Thank you. Anybody have any questions here? I'm only running fast because I know you got a tight agenda. Well, if you put them in the chat, I'll be happy to answer them later and so on. Just kind of closing up. Listen, let me help you tell your data story. This is what I literally do for a living. So webinars, events, I help with data storytelling, consulting, both for service providers on the tech side, as well as enterprises like yourself too. If you want my book, go up to technicspublications.com. Use my code Data Whisperer, you save 20%. At minimum, please follow me on LinkedIn. Put your phone right up to my QR code. It'll take you right to my profile. Talk about being a structured data guy. And I got 50 plus videos on YouTube, Data Whisperer YouTube channel there. They are all about the value and power of data management and how to help you explain it. So if anything there helps you make a point, reinforce something, illuminate something, says what you say exactly, but it validated from a third-party source, take them, use them. You can't steal them from me. I'm giving them to you. And if you like this stuff and you want to post or you want to put a nice recommendation on my YouTube channel, here's a nice example from Bruce Lee. Scott's the most entertaining public speaker I've ever encountered, period. Thank you, Bruce. Anyway, I want to thank you all at DAMA Philly here. Thanks for having me again. Hopefully I'll be in the the Hall of Flags someday soon, and everybody will be in person, but I'll take a breath one more time and thank you all very much for having me. Thank you, Eugene and Ray and Chantel, for bringing me along.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully in the fall. But we were going to take a quick 5-minute break before our next speaker and panel. Yeah, I definitely second the video channel. It's an easy way to make a lot of people understand in a very short amount of time and in a very lively manner what we struggle with sometimes as data professionals. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know, 5 minutes. So it's 9:43. Let's say 9:40. I'm gonna actually make it 5 minutes. Is that weird? 9:48. Around 9:50. Around 9:50. But for sure, make sure you come back. And if you want to unmute and network and talk in the meantime, that's good. I wanted to thank Alation for sponsoring this meeting. And in addition to sponsoring, John Tecce lined up the panel as well. So and helped us get connected with Philly Tech Week. So thank you, John. Yeah, I'll kick it off to you. But yeah, I'm guessing 5 minutes from now, right? Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Oh, yes. There's a link for a free Alation shirt. Thank you for that as well.
Full disclosure, I have no idea what these shirts look like. I do not have them myself, so I cannot vouch for the design or the comfort, but free is free.
That's quite all right. I think some of the shirts are always you always have to kind of look at these shirts before you put them on closely. One of the years I got where is it? I think it's the innocuous looking shirt, Hadoop, right? On the front, I don't think I noticed this right away. There you go.
Tremendous.
Still doing acid. There you go.
There you go.
So great concert shirt. Maybe not so great conference. Well, it depends on where you are, and your comfort level with a joke. So I held on to it, but
I would love to have our shirts referred to as great concert shirts.
Yeah, listen, yeah. Talking about DAMA Phil, I think when Stacy was president, she took DAMA Phil to there's actually a band called Big Data. And she went to the concert, and there was a picture of her somewhere, I think it's on our website actually, of her next to the Big Data t-shirt. So there you go.
Said 9:48, right?
Something like that, yeah. Just giving people, an approximate time. It's not like we're actually, leaving the room and making sure we're coming back these days, but it does give people a chance for a bio break, a coffee break. And again, I wish we could offer those things, and we could offer the coffee and our usual refreshments in person. And hopefully we do have one more meeting that we added on while everybody's kind of tuning back in. We normally do 5 meetings a year, September, November, January, March, and May. And we added a June meeting just because the meetings have been on the shorter side in this virtual space. So we wanted to give that whole entire year's value worth, so to speak, to our members. So June 30th, we do have one more meeting, and look for an invite for that. But the fall meeting, and that is a virtual meeting still, but yeah, I'm hoping as things reopen now, they, in Philadelphia, they said that, 100% reopening is June 11th. And the only thing that will remain in effect is the mask mandate, and for the time being, and then any pre-pandemic mandates as well. So you do have to wear your pants as well. That's leaving the Zoom world, you forget. But so yeah, I think that looks pretty promising for us to get back together in September.
Do we have a topic for the June 30th yet? Did I miss that?
We do. Thank you for actually we have a speaker, and I have to firm up the topic. But it's somebody who spoke to our chapter before, Michael Schofield. I believe our lead topic was COVID-19 data quality, but I have to firm that up right after this. So. Good reminder. Okay, well, I think we're right up at time when I approximately said everybody should try to get back together. And John, you'll go ahead and introduce our panel. I did want to say a special thank you and to anybody tuning in from Philly Tech Week. I know we are cross-listed now. This is an aspiration of ours for some time, and it's great to have that happen once again, thanks to Alation. So for anybody tuning in that has not been to one of our meetings before, just we've been around, I think, since '92. One of the chapters of DAMA International, and we're all about data. It's the short of it. So John, please go ahead. I know the topic is, just to set up the panel, it's a pretty interesting, balance. Sometimes you see this in companies of, well, how much governance do you really need? This is a pretty competitive space. We're trying to move quickly. And you see this tug of rope sometimes between governance, innovation. Do we have time for both? And I think I'm excited to hear more about Alation, and I'm also excited to hear the panelists kind of take on that topic. So thank you, John. I'll kick it over to you.
Absolutely. And thank you. We'll do a quick Alation commercial and then launch into the panel here. Everybody that can see my screen here, I promise it's 2 slides. This will not be a slideware barrage, but for those unfamiliar, Alation is the founder of the data catalog space and really helping customers answer questions around how to find data, like where is the data, and then data management. A lot of what Scott just talked about, data management, data governance, right? Can I use the data? Should I use the data? How should I use that data? The outcome is really driving at 3 things, right? It's reducing the time and resources required to find data within the enterprise, increasing that trust through what we call active data governance, and accelerating cloud migration. So utilizing the popularity of data assets to understand, hey, everybody's trying to get to Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, Synapse, et cetera, right? And a great starting place for that, of course, is the data that's most frequently used. So you use the catalog to identify information sources, everything from your databases, BI objects, articles, queries, visualizations, right? Alation ingests that metadata, sample data, and the query logs that come from that, applies behavioral analysis to that, and is able to then tell you, hey, here's your most popular assets, 1, 2, based on crowdsourcing with your stewards. Here's the data that the folks in your organization that understand it, use it, and trust it, they validated this, right? Or haven't. There's a deprecation, right? And lastly, being able to imply that governance throughout. So being able to put right in front of somebody's face, hey, this data contains PII. We want you to be able to use it safely for yourself and for the company, not locking it down with that command and control approach, but enabling users to use that, driving data literacy so that they understand how to use it. So those are the goals of the Alation catalog from a commercial standpoint. Other quick thing, we are growing very rapidly. So as a company, we've doubled in size over the last 2 years. In the last year, through obviously a pandemic and very challenging conditions, grown over 35%. And right now we have over 50 job openings as a company. So we've grown our presence here in the Philly area from 0 not too long ago to now about a half dozen employees, and we'll continue to do so hiring remotely. So not just from a practitioner standpoint, but if you know anybody looking around, obviously we are growing rapidly in the space. So dividing line here, that was the Alation commercial. I want to pivot now actually to the fun part, which is the panel, which is sponsored by Alation. However, there will be no discussion about Alation here. Goal really is around that topic that Diné called out, is balancing data analytics innovation with data governance. And I think playing off of what Scott talked about, we'll dive into that language aspect, right? The words you use, how you define some of these things to begin with. And we'll hear from Allison, Wendy, and Jeff on how they apply this in their roles. So we'll dive in here. We're going to go in alphabetical order for introductions. We'll start with Allison Westbrook.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Westbrook. I am a director of data strategy and delivery at Lincoln Financial Group. A lot of the work that my team currently does is in fact in that data management space. So we are tasked with helping to build a centralized data platform for a large functional area in Lincoln Financial Group. I've been in the analytics space for 20 years in a variety of industries. I started out at Deloitte Consulting, building business intelligence solutions before there were out-of-the-box BI solutions. Some of you might remember Hyperion Essbase. And we would use Hyperion Essbase and ArcPlan. That's another, people in the Philly area may or may not know that old reporting tool. And Cold Fusion. I went back then after that and got my MBA and worked at Harrah's Entertainment, which became Caesars in marketing analytics. Found myself in the insurance space a few years later and kind of moved back into more of the data management space after being in sales analytics for a number of years. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll let Wendy speak more. I have 2 kids, 5 and 3. I live in the Boston area, but originally from the Philadelphia area, and a lot of my heart still belongs there. My parents and family are in the area. So nice to meet everybody. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks, Allison. Wendy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy. I'm currently the Director of Data Governance and Strategy at Sallie Mae. I've been in the data and analytics field for about 15 years, also across different industries from nonprofit to federal sector, where I actually spent a combination of 8 years working for the US Air Force, NASA, Federal Reserve Board of Governors, one of the regulators. In the industry, I spent about 3 years working for Wells Fargo, where I led a team to provide end-to-end data solutions for our statistical modeling division. It also did a little bit consulting prior coming to Sallie Mae earlier this year. So I'm very new to the company, only under 6 months, and still learning about the business products and corporate culture, but it's a very exciting time for the company as the market leader in the private student loan market. And we're really trying to redefine how higher education is funded. I'm very happy to be here as well, and looking forward to the discussion with the panel.
Thanks, Wendy. And Jeff.
Sorry, I think I was on mute there. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. So Jeff Richardson, I am currently the CIO of the AES division of a company called PPD, both of which I assume nobody's ever heard of. So AES is Accelerated Enrollment Solutions. We are a recruitment and clinical studies organization. We run clinical trials around the world. PPD is a CRO, which is a new type of organization in the last like 5 or 7 years, which is a contract research organization. So when you think about how Pfizer might run a COVID study globally around the world with like 75,000 people, they're really good at like making drugs and delivering value through vaccines. They're probably not terribly good at like logistics around finding and recruiting people for a study and running those studies. AES and PPD run all of those studies. So we ran like about 1/3 of all the COVID studies for all the vaccines that were successful and were not successful around the world. So it's a pretty exciting area of like life science technology. My role at AES is I'm the CIO broadly in charge of technology and data. And then at the larger PPD, I'm also in charge of a technology and data stack. So 17 years of analytics and big data experience, machine learning, all that good stuff. My passion is just bringing good, solid insights and data to people through information sharing and data. So things like the DAMA group is near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Really looking forward to the conversation here. And I think we could probably actually starting with housekeeping. So we want to make this interactive. In addition to, I'll be asking a couple questions here of our panelists, but please feel free to put any questions in the chat and I can translate those into our conversation here. And then we'll be pausing for questions at the end as well. So I want to make sure that you get maximum value out of our 3 panelists today. And I think to start, maybe we start with what Scott had really driven home, which is that the words that are used and communicated both internally and externally with your roles really carry a lot of weight and can mean a lot of different things. So when you think about balancing data analytics with data governance, I mean, it might be a good place to start with just like how you define those things in your organization. Maybe we start with governance, and Wendy, I'll ask you to kick that off since that's really the core function of your role now. Is just how are you defining governance today?
Sure, happy to take that one. When we think about governance, especially data governance, the formal definition first is the exercise of authority and control over management of data as assets. So data management with the ultimate goal of deriving value from data is having the driver to manage data properly. And the data governance officially is the process that will guide data management functions. So it's really focusing on how decisions are made and how people and assets on processes, how people and processes are expected to behave in relation to data. And everything I just said there, actually, those are the official definitions. And the way I interpret data governance is more of the process to formalize and standardize the data management practices. And I use those specific words because I really believe in that a lot of times that people say, now we have to do data governance, as if data governance is a separate and overlay process that we have to do. When in reality, I would say most organizations, if not all of them, are already doing data governance. It's just a form of doing it informally and most likely very inefficiently, ineffectively. But everybody is doing data governance. So we need to put structure around how we manage data that comes in the formalizing the official process. Standardizing is because like one of the biggest challenges in the data world for a lot of companies is silo. And if we're doing data governance already, we're doing it locally and disconnected and separately. So that's where standardizing comes in. We need to have an enterprise view that cuts across silos and really enable us to manage data as a shared asset.
Ask Allison and Jeff, curious if you have any additional thoughts on how, and Wendy did a phenomenal job, I think, summarizing both the formal definition and then her approach today. Curious, from your perspective, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think Wendy's point there about how many companies do data governance now, just kind of like some of them in isolation, some of them informally, that works really well. And like that's worked really well for the last 10, 20 years. But we've reached this inflection point now where there's so much data. It's so important, right? There's so many regulations and rules. And just to stay ahead of the curve, you need so much more guidance and governance that informality, if that's a word, is really going to become a problem for a lot of companies if they don't formalize it. If you're small enough, you can be informal and agile and you can do that successfully. But there are companies with 20, 30, 80,000 employees who still have an informal governance of like a data governance model. And those companies are either going to fall behind or be in a lot of trouble very quickly. That's my take on this. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think excellent points. To kind of add to that, and I think it's a great point, like the informality of a lot of the current structure around data governance. Another way I kind of think about it is like in the locations where the governance is happening. So you have all of your data sources, you've got potentially an operational data store, an electronic data warehouse where your data is being moved into, and then it's moving into data marts, data sets to your reports. So in a lot of cases, you need governance in all of those areas, and that can be very inconsistent in terms of who's owning that or who's managing that in those different areas. Like at the data sources, you have your customers or system users entering data there. And as the first presentation said, you get garbage in, you get garbage out, right? So so kind of the setup, the maintenance of how that data is being entered, like there should be some governance there. And then, it moves more into IT. And unless you kind of have a governance organization that's looking at all of those areas, it's hard to get visibility, I would say, into all of those different areas and ensure that the data is being transformed in a way that's going to make it consumable at the end.
It's hard to get visibility, but also when you try to, I find it becomes very emotional. Like once you get those big data stores, right, and you distribute that to your company, and like once you try to have like even a little bit of governance, like everyone freaks out, like you're taking away everything in their world. Like they're just so upset and so emotional, and it becomes this like huge, like you've offended my people and my culture, like, and we're going to be enemies now until the end of time. And I don't know how to balance that, but like I've seen that in my last job, I've seen that in this job, I've seen that in other companies. It's just like it's crazy.
Yeah, and I've seen it take the form in some cases where IT wants to sort of control the data and not control the creation of assets, but as you get an analytics organization that's more advanced and really
that doesn't work. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't work. So yeah, it's kind of evolved, I think, as there's more analytics users that really can create their own data sets and data marts. That control of IT just saying, you can't go in there, you can't touch this stuff, just doesn't work anymore.
Right. My take on this, to try to like offer a solution there, is it's got to come across as enablement, right? You've got to come across as being the person that's enabling more access to data. And then like, kind of like I trick my 3-year-old now into eating vegetables, like, right, you hide governance in enablement. So some of that is like rolling out new tools where you trick them and it's like, oh, they have guardrails now. But that's like that's my current play. And I would love to hear from like people and questions and you guys, like what your thoughts are on how you do that without like basically causing like a turf war.
I think that's a very good point, especially the point, Jeff, you mentioned that people are very protective and they get defensive right away the moment you come in. And I just, from speaking from experience, when I try to build out the data solutions for a lot of the existing business processes, the silo was really, it cannot get worse because every business had their own databases, their processes, their management functions and their data governance. And it's really difficult to start the question or the conversation about like what we want to do. And this is actually one of the takeaways from the previous speaker, Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, is that you have to start a conversation about them. Like, what would you like to do that we can help you? So that comes in the enablement part. And then going above and beyond that is like, what can you not do with the data that we have, but you like to do? So allow us to help you make that happen. So it's almost like a reverse engineering where we're going in to solve a business problem for them instead of having our own agenda, which is obviously embedded, but we have to start a business conversation, strategy and the problem formulation first before we're bringing the actual technical stuff, data modeling, architect and governance and policy and control, which will only happen later if they buy into our story. So that has been my experience.
Great question in the chat that I think lends itself to that around, I think it speaks to the topic, right, is utilizing innovation and business-oriented outcomes to drive governance. Eugene asked about things like a hackathon, right, or things that allow your business stakeholders to pursue that goal while still obviously adhering to the governance and I don't know, I mean, constraints or whatever word you want to use around it. And I think that kind of lends itself to the larger question of how we're even defining innovation within governance, right? I think maybe Jeff, I'll ask you to start off with that conversation around using innovation to drive governance, or just how you would define innovation in that context.
Yep. So sorry, just one housekeeping thing. I assume most of you live like near or around Philadelphia. I am selling my house and I have to get a sewer inspection done at some point. And I just got a message saying they're going to be here in like the next 30 minutes now, because of course, why would they not pick this time? If you're not from Philadelphia or like the Delco area, it's like a law now. It's so bizarre. So if I disappear for like 2 minutes, that's because I'm just saying hi to the guy and telling him to get going. Just weird. So innovation, I look at innovation as the ability to turn some idea, whether, whatever it is, some idea into value, right? In some kind of way. That's like my sort of nonsensical version. I assume there's a real definition. I did not look up the real definition, Wendy, so I feel a little attacked there. But basically innovation is turning that idea into value. And it's also trying to stay relevant, right? As things move around. So, whatever you're doing in your company right now, like if you're not constantly innovating with data, you're going to get left behind. That's my take on that. So like innovation is the lifeblood of keeping you relevant in your business.
What do you, Alison, in terms of your role, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about, you're kind of embedded in the business, right? So you have to drive that innovation, but still adhering. I mean, what do you think based on that around the innovation topic?
So, go ahead. Sorry, Alison.
No, I think Jeff's definition is a really, really good one. And I think in my current role, I part of what I'm supposed to do is kind of provide innovation in terms of analytics innovation to teams to help them solve their business problems or help them use data to solve their business problems. So kind of our organization has helped to bring in new analytics tools that one of the big problems in my company is that there are so many different silos of data. Lincoln Financial just a couple of years ago acquired Liberty Mutual Benefits. So Lincoln has a group benefits organization, which is STD, LTD, life insurance products, and also, has a retirement planning solutions and annuities business. So I work mostly in the, in the group benefit space. But, because of that acquisition, we have so many different source systems, and a lot of them perform the same functions. We have 2 different claim systems. We've got several quoting systems. So part of the innovation has been trying to just figure out how to combine that data in effective ways to be able to get visibility. And so that doesn't maybe seem so innovative in terms of what the most advanced companies out there are doing right now. But that was innovation for Lincoln because they really needed better access and the ability, as we talked about in some of those data management areas, to be able to make sure that the same customers that they're selling to, they have full information on both sides of that that merger acquisition. So part of what my group is doing is that enablement function is really trying to help consolidate that data, help centralize it, provide new analytics tools, and give people better access. And that's kind of been the innovation that our group's doing. I don't know that speaks to the innovation at the at the level of what the data scientists are doing with the data, more like Jeff was maybe talking about, but that's just a slightly different perspective on it.
Dale mentioned in the chat, I think it lends to what both of you just described, is that innovation can be new ideas, but it's often thought of as new ideas, right? And looking at, kind of pace setting companies in that space, but can also be bringing old ideas into value. And for a lot of large organizations with those silos, it's not necessarily an old idea, but it hasn't been brought to value yet, right? So
I had this exact conversation the other day with the word novel, and people thought I was crazy because one of the data scientists on my staff made an R Shiny app that took like a whole bunch of stuff that we've done for years apparently at this company and built it into like a self-service tool. And I described it as incredibly novel and innovative. And they said, this isn't novel, like we've had this forever. And I was like, well, this is completely like you've shifted the paradigm, like this black box sort of like crazy thing nobody understood. Like they can go to a website now and just run it themselves. So innovation becomes those like weird little like half steps and quarter steps and full steps that you can just like push value forward. I don't know. I think it's exciting.
Good way to look. Wendy, I mean, you're newer to your role, obviously, but you've had both public sector and private sector experience in this. I mean, I would imagine the definition of innovation probably has a very wide set of potential rules around it. What has your experience been there?
Yeah, absolutely. So innovation, to piggyback on what Jeff and Alison already mentioned, that in terms of new ideas, but new ways of doing things, but also thinking outside of the box. When I think about innovation, in my experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be a brand new idea that nobody ever thought of, nothing that has never done before. Most of the time is more of thinking outside of the box and like thinking about new ways. And it doesn't even have to be external, really. I just always go back to my experience with at Wells Fargo, where I was building end-to-end data solutions, is that there were so many silos and data qualities, and it was such a really big challenge for us. But then it got me thinking about that we're always playing a catch-up game, right? So you're always trying to resolve the past. You don't really completely resolve that. You kind of put the Band-Aid on, you get good enough data so that you can build out some statistical models and answer to the regulator, but you never really resolve the problem from the root. And then you're gonna deal with this like year after year. But then think about looking forward, how could you have prevented that from happening. Like if we're able to go back in time, like 10 years ago, and what Alison mentioned, that in terms of silos due to merger and acquisition, that was also very common for me. The challenges that I had, and not just like it's for a huge company, you had so many mergers, acquisitions, and reworks and accounting changes, but nobody really took a moment to think about how could we have done it differently. And instead of just like massaging the data, maybe you should have involved other departments, other business functions when you're building out data solutions. And it's not just an IT function, that because IT does not involve accounting, and nobody really think of accounting needs to be involved, right? When you do the merger and acquisition, how do you actually merge the system? So that, to me, it could be innovation in ideas, in like going forward, how can we foresee what kind of challenges that could come up due to the nature of the business, that you're going to continue to have merger and acquisitions, you're going to have reworks, and you're going to have accounting changes. Databases don't talk to each other because they're designed that way to serve the corresponding business lines of functions, but they really need to sync up so that you don't keep having this problem. You don't always play a catch-up game. And so that's just an example of that. It doesn't have to be technology. It can be. It doesn't have to be a brand new idea. It doesn't have to be go above and beyond, like outside of your company. You look into the industry, you can, but it just like involves the going outside of your usual way of thinking, and it's just like what else can be done. So that is actually innovation in my mind.
Wendy, you're touching on one of the things. I took some notes on this before we had started, and like one of the pain points that I find with innovation is you hinted at this a little bit, but it's not putting the right amount of backing and effort and support behind innovation. So you get those great ideas or whatever it is, or you have like an M&A thing that you get kind of far along and then you just stop, right? And I find a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, a lot of people, a lot of managers, they like the concept of innovation up until the point where it like might cost money or time or more resources. And then like, whoa. Like you were going to innovate. Like that was free stuff. You were going to make my life better. Like, I don't want to spend this many dollars or this many hours doing that. And like, I really think that if companies want to be innovative, they need to like dedicate time to innovation. Google does this well. They claimed 2 years ago, and I think now everybody lives in like PTSD there, but they used to dedicate like 20 hours of everyone's week to just doing things that were innovative, right? And that's how they invented Gmail. That's how they invented like all those other great services that became massive and giant. So companies today, though, I find like don't want to dedicate that time. And if you don't block off time to make innovation real and like let it grow and then foster that like little innovation spark into like a fire, you just get a whole bunch of like really good C pluses that could have been like A plus pluses. So, but my only takeaway there for everybody else is like, if you are a person that can make that decision and like offer that to people, like give them time to grow that innovation, absolutely you need to do that and like let people have time to make those things work.
It's been interesting to see. I think on top of that is the change over the last, what are we in, 14 months now since COVID really began to impact the United States in March. Just anecdotally, I was hearing the word innovation a lot more before March of last year than I have since. And I've heard the word governance a lot more since last March than I did before. And that's reflected in a lot of data that you'll see from the big analyst firms that have kind of said, look, things like self-service have taken a little bit of a backseat to governance. And anecdotally, it seems because everything hit the fan, for lack of a better term, and we were talking about this last week on our prep call for this. A lot of people were asking for data that normally weren't, right? Or were asking for data for different reasons, and kind of steer the conversation back to, well, wait a minute. We don't even have, like, we've been trying to innovate, right? But we haven't even put basic governance in place, or to Wendy's point, maybe governance has been happening, but we haven't really documented and been able to communicate that to the business stakeholders that are asking for this. And Scott talked a lot about that, right? Being able to communicate that value, but that's really been challenged over the last year, obviously, because it's different requests than it was. I think maybe that blends into and Rahul asked a great question in the chat about kind of like starting that data governance conversation and getting your business stakeholders on board, leveraging innovation to do that. But maybe ask Allison to kind of start on this, like balancing standards for development, right? Like aligning definitions, making sure you stay agile to serve your internal customers, but using that as a case to also drive governance. What are your thoughts on that? What's your experience been on that?
Sure. So kind of harkening back to that structure that I was saying in the beginning. I mean, you know, the governance kind of resides in a couple different areas in our organization. So there's a specific data governance and strategy group that does kind of more the source system piece of it. So within the data management space, you know, we work very, very closely with them. But in the, you know, the centralization of the data, you need to have some standards for what you're building and how you're going to build it, right? Like, is it going to be a cloud architecture? We've been building, but we'll be moving to the cloud architecture, you know, a model of DIMs and facts, you know, based on dimensions and facts, based on Kimball. And so when you have a lot of different developers doing the development, you need to make sure they're building towards the same structure. And then you also need to be working with your governance groups to really say, what are the definitions? I mean, and you know, in talking to a lot of the analysts that work with this data, it's a huge problem for them. I mean, because there's so many different systems, because there isn't a fully centralized, you know, that's something we're working on. We're making a lot of progress, but it's not all the way there yet. They're going into places and they don't know the names. You know, they'll look into a column and they'll say, is this the right column? You know, it's titled this, but where did it come from in the system? It's, you know, it's similar to this other column in this other database. You know, is that the same thing? Is it not? There's a lot of challenges with different functions doing similar analysis, but using different data sets. So there's both been those kind of standards around development, but then the challenges that the analysts are still having around trying to make sure they find the right data, that the data that they're finding has explanations and it has definitions. And so that's where we're trying to get a broader visibility. You know, we've done a lot of our background research on like, what are all of the different systems and old databases that are out there. And that's why we've been looking at something, you know, we're working on bringing in a tool like Alation to get a better visibility and transparency into our whole ecosystem of data, so that we can identify those areas that are being used the most and may have the most value to the business to really bring into our centralized platform. We can identify and provide more information about the data to really eliminate that finding and searching for data. So that's one of the more, you know, I'd say innovative things that we're working on right now to help with the collaboration, to help drive innovation in the usage of data in the business, while also kind of saying, hey, you know, it's less that model I was talking about in the past where IT says, hey, you can't touch this. We've really evolved over the last couple of years to try to more democratize, you know, the access and the usage of data while still protecting things like PII, you know, public personal information that's not allowed to be seen or released, especially in combinations, things like social security number and name with that, or you know, customer address, that kind of thing. So yeah, you know, there's definitely a balancing act, and you know, we're definitely still evolving in what we're doing in that space.
Allison, you hit on a couple of seconds ago one of the things that was my last note on this that I had written down, which is with innovation, if you don't communicate what you've innovated, like there's really no innovation there. And I've noticed this a lot in like the last like 10 years, like what I was doing, especially when I was like managing smaller teams. Like we would do such crazy, smart, fast, great things that we would like keep in our group, and we would like wonder why nobody adopted them or why it was like a surprise when they came up. And if you are not championing and like sitting on some kind of rooftop yelling about the things that you've just innovated, it's hard for people to understand it because it's new and they're not going to get it. So like you have to be your own like mouthpiece and champion and communicator on all of these things, both communicating like what you did, like why it's awesome, but also like the value and how to use it, because most of the time many times it's so new, nobody understands it.
I think that's an excellent point. And it's been a big focus for our organization is how do we, and I think part of it, we've talked a lot about, how do you stay agile? We've started small with things and then tried to drive adoption around it. So starting small to like kind of have the proof of value. And also not to have a huge expenditure up front, right? Like where people say, wow, you've spent whatever, $500,000 on this. And like, what are we getting out of it? It's like you start smaller, but you communicate and you engage people and you continue to ask for feedback. So you say, how's this going? What are you doing? And how can we support it? Like, how can we?
Right. It's got to be that partnership.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point, Jeff. Yeah,
the difference between innovation and mad science is like razor thin if you're not partnering with people.
Yes, that's true. People are like, what are they doing over there? Does it matter? Like,
right.
Like, I don't understand.
Hey, interesting. Actually, first a comment just around like aligning definitions. There's a manufacturer locally that I've done some work with in the past that we were talking about like source. I mean, Eugene calls that a great example of, like a column called correct _ product _ code because or like you use this one, right?
Yes, data actually in there where they say don't use this group, it's old.
Right. Yeah.
I think Rich kind of takes that in another direction, which is engaging the dev teams at the time of creation. It might add time to the delivery, but how do you get those dev teams creating the data to early on, right? Align those definitions. I have an example locally of a manufacturer that refers, like anecdotally in their vernacular in their company, revenue is referred to as R7, right? So we have to, what is R7? There's an Excel that everybody used that, everybody knew that cell R7 was revenue. But it's like, okay, but if you just joined that company, somebody's talking about 7, you're like, what the hell are they talking about? So to Rich's question, like, how do you engage those dev teams early on to make sure that you can create data that can be used and understood on an ongoing basis? Maybe Wendy, I'll ask you to start with that since that's sounds like some of what you're working on.
Sure. Actually, it is something we're working on, and because we're standing up this new organization, the data governance framework, and there are a lot of things we're working on. That's actually one of them. What we're doing is to take an enterprise view. So this, again, is trying to break down silo, but look at the data from the enterprise level and to understand exactly where we are. And I haven't really encountered the situation where it's like do not use column, but I definitely have seen that previously at other places. And there are a lot of like intricacies about data that if you have not been working with it for years or decades, you probably wouldn't know. So those institutional knowledge, they reside with people. They're not actually part of the standardized process or documentation. And how do you deal with that? The first thing we did is just take stock of where we are and then come up with the goal of where we would like to be. That's like a gap in assessment analysis. And then obviously you can't tackle everything at once. And there's the common thing that people say, you can't boil the ocean. Then we really want to prioritize which are the important components within our data system that we need to tackle first. And then we would classify them based on the significance. And then we think about like this from source to target and where does it start? And then how can we communicate that kind of requirements? So we're actually in the process of doing that. It's like understanding what the current system does and where it falls short, and then that will facilitate a lot of the discussions we have with the technical team in terms of how things are being done and why things are done this way and do they work. And then when I say do they work, not just like a simple answer, oh yeah, they work, but we also want to understand why does it work? Does it work because it's an optimal process that is doing everything it's supposed to do, or does it work because they're just like a workaround? A lot of times we'll want to talk to people very close to the management of databases, data as an asset versus people who are a little bit removed from the process. So that again is the institutional knowledge that you wouldn't have had if you just talk to people who head up a division, because they don't know all the intricacies and details. They're usually removed from that kind of hands-on like a workaround. So we really took a really deep look at the current processes to understand that. Then before we come up with solutions for how we can address this technically, and then from the business standpoint, what that's going to require and what is our first step, and then what is it going to be, which part of that is going to be enabled by technology, right? So a tool or like new software purchases that can help us with that, and which part of that is going to be more of the people and mindset change. And we're in the middle of it. So I will report back and then tell you guys and how that went. But that is the basic thought process of getting people involved early and then really communicate why we're doing this instead of just making that a requirement. We need to do this. We really want to start the conversation with why and the perceived benefits and bring them early into the conversation very early on, and not just like high level management, but also people on the ground, like very close to the daily work, because those people are the ones who really have very intimate knowledge about why things work and why don't work, which area will be nice to be improved. So that's how we're approaching it.
Jeff, Allison, I'm curious of your experience working with, just from, playing off of what Wendy's working on now, just like culturally. I know, Jeff, you're newer to your role, right? So probably meeting a lot of these dev teams over the last couple of months and understanding how the current process goes, and engaging them to understand, hey, here's what's in it for you to do this, the first time. Has that been discussed? I'm curious how you're handling that.
Yeah, I think our organization has, in the last couple of years, moved to more fully an agile methodology. And so that seems to help a lot, because there are specific agile ceremonies where there are like demos out to the business. There's planning that happens at the beginning of a program increment. And then at the end, there are demos of each team of what they've accomplished out to the business. And so that helps from the standpoint of like a better knowledge of like what's actually happening, or how things are being developed. There's still a lot of challenges with some of the, I think, things Wendy mentioned earlier about like system integrations, like systems that don't necessarily fully talk to each other. And then there's also, I just always think about free-form entry fields, similar to like, some of the things we were talking about, like that's actually one of the challenges we're working with right now. It's causing downstream processes to break because something is sort of fully free-form. And until the process can actually be systematically coded or changed, you need to have some strength internally on, like Wendy was saying, process change in terms of the people using it. They need to have some, I don't know if standards is the right word, but some communication to them about how they should be systematically entering the data so that downstream it's not breaking processes. If you're really evolved, maybe that stuff doesn't happen anymore. But yeah, I've definitely, especially going through a merger and an acquisition over the last couple of years, we've experienced a lot of those things. So there's that balance of like, okay, well, we need an immediate solution. Can we code around this in the other process? But if you have something that's free form and in terms of entry, it's really difficult for a developer to code around that and not know what's going to come through at any given time. So changing some of the existing processes around entering data can be a shorter term fix while you're waiting for the development. Ideally, the development would be really fast, right? But
yeah, the only thing I have to echo there is communication, and then bringing people along with you, right? That kind of community for the innovation, whatever it is, like you have to do that. Both of you said that much more eloquently, so I'm just going to stop there.
I think in wrapping up, I think the last topic we want to tackle around this is just misconceptions that you see. I think we've touched on a bunch of them, right? Around even just the terminology of governance and innovation, around the processes and sometimes around just getting stuck in your own company's processes. I mean, all three of you have gone through a combination of mergers and acquisitions, recent role changes. You've been in different industries, but I'm sure you've seen, some common threads in terms of misconceptions around either of these topics or both.
This is my last note that I have on this, which is exactly that. There's two things that drive me nuts with both data governance and innovation, and they're the same exact things. You really can't put a timeline around innovation. Like, that just makes sense. But you also really can't put a timeline around data governance, because if it happens like in a 3-month window, again, everyone freaks out and they get so emotional and like jump off, like just it's insane. And you can't dictate either one of them either. Like, you can't dictate and go be innovative, right? And you also can't successfully, I've found, dictate data governance. So like forcing timelines and forcing sort of like too much process on this, I feel like in both cases gets you incredibly either bad results or just total abject failure.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly in terms of, where Jeff, I think, kind of was leading a little bit, was you put too much process or structure around it, and people, like, they hear governance and they feel like you're trying to block them from getting to data. And I think that's a misconception, whereas like good governance is really about helping or enabling, like we've been talking about.
It becomes like seamless. Yeah, you know who does a really good job of this? Panera does a really good job of this, right? They make the soup with the cheddar and the calories and everything, but it's got broccoli in it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a great way to trick somebody to have broccoli. So like, you need a broccoli cheddar soup for data governance and innovation.
I like that analogy. Yeah. So it's kind of, how do you not make, how do people not be scared about it, and understand a little bit better that it's not about trying to not let them get at data. It's about really helping to facilitate the usage, I guess, is one of the misconceptions around governance. And I think around innovation, we've touched upon that it has to be big, right? Like, I think there's a lot of incremental innovation that really can add a lot of value to an organization. And I think incremental innovation is fun, because it's a lot of what we've talked about is like doing something in a slightly different way that then makes it add value, just a tweak. Like, you're posting a training video, right? But have you indexed that? Like, that might not even seem innovative, right? But it actually makes people use it. So if they're not using it, like, they're not getting the value out of it. And so, I mean, that's a really small example that may not seem innovative, but it's really about the usage, right? Like, it's about creating that value. So a small innovation maybe end up creating just as much value as a huge, like I said, $1 million project for something.
That's very true. So it's not something that we can tell people, okay, now go innovate, now go do data governance. It doesn't really have a start and finish. It actually supposed to be part of the business process. It should be integrated. It should be part of what we do, part of how we handle data, how we derive value from data in general. And then data governance, like, the word governance is really is not a popular word, right? Every time you come in, you tell people I'm gonna govern you, and then people like immediately they will tense up. It's like they think there are a lot of misperceptions about that. People think data is governance is actually going to be very disruptive. That is going to cause organizational changes. Is going to put constraints on our processes, and it's going to be very invasive because it's going to ask you to do a complete makeover. Then I would say, like, it can, right? So if you don't plan it well, if there's no thoughtful planning of the actual approach we're going to take, it can be all of that. And it can also be very expensive, but it doesn't have to be. So I really prescribe to the non-invasive data governance approach is to focus on what's already taking place. This comes back to the previous point. Companies are already doing data governance informally. So we need to formalize the process. So what's actually working and what's missing and what can be improved. And then we go from there. We leverage what's already in place and we build off of that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive either, because there are so many benefits about data governance, and the value proposition is important, not just in the initial stage of getting leadership buy-in for us to do this now, but also really properly communicate the value of data as an asset. And then this could have so many different facets. It could have the literal meaning of data as an asset on your balance sheet, which the general accounting standard doesn't allow that yet, but that might change. And so you really don't want to wait until like that happens, and then you think about how to put your data as an asset on your balance sheet. But then the ultimate goal of communicating that kind of value is not to put data as a item on the balance sheet now. Is more of communicating the notion that data is really valuable, and then properly determining the return on investment for data projects, and think about what we would be able to do, and think about what we're not doing right now, we cannot do due to all the challenges with data. So all of those things are really, really essential. And I really believe that we could have very practical but non-threatening approach to data governance to mediate the ownership, but also promote stewarding data as a cross-organization asset rather than in silo fashion.
I'm excited to see both Sallie Mae and Lincoln Financial put data on their balance sheets.
Eventually, I think that will happen.
I like that.
I would argue a lot of companies now, like that IPO'd recently, like most of their value is based in simply data. So while it's not like legally on their balance sheets, like the ridiculous multiples that lots of companies have right now, is that value of data. So not a financial asset, but it becomes like a market cap asset.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and then the other part of data is instead of not just monetary value, you can sell your data. Yeah, for sure. You could be a data broker. You can package up your data and sell it, but you can also exchange it for goods and services. There are so many different ways to extract value from data, not just like direct monetary transaction. I'm actually part of the industry working group, and we're working on defining the standard to put data as an asset on the balance sheet, and then also the standard to determine the ROI for data projects. So I'll keep you guys posted.
I think I posted in the chat, but it's an interesting point about, looking at the future of the value of data. And I think around that, how governance can drive that. I'm sure many folks saw GoPuff's recent funding announcements. Since we're in the Philly area, they are the largest, I think right now, by funding the largest startup. They just fueled Philly's largest VC quarter in, I think, over 2 decades. Thinking about my own experience with GoPuff, I can guarantee that they have some insane data on the very specific needs at very specific times of day of residents that they serve. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes going forward. And as we wrap up here, any final comments around the topic, or just in general things we didn't get to that you wanted to share? We'll start with Allison, then Wendy and Jeff.
I think Wendy wrapped it up really well. I think that the concept of data on the balance sheet is a really good one. I think she also mentioned some things that are really critical that maybe we hadn't touched upon earlier, which were some of the improving some of the value of this, can sometimes be in doing those ROIs or showing like the productivity. So for a financial organization to be able to say, well, how do we, fund a little bit of innovation? How do we create productivity through data governance? There are some ways that you can do that by saying, okay, well, the implementation or the alignment, the centralization, like showing what the time it took to do something before was, and then what it's going to take after you implement these new tools or alignment across the organization. And there's definitely value there. So that's, I think a great tool that Wendy mentioned in terms of, actually leveraging an ROI to prove out value.
I'll just add very briefly that it is very challenging to do data governance. It shouldn't have to be, but it is in a lot of ways. And then we have to do the convincing, the storytelling, at least at this stage. And I'm hoping that as time goes by and then more and more people will buy into what we're trying to do. We're not trying to interfere with business processes or put constraints. We're actually trying to enable you with better decision making, faster, more effective, with more accurate data. And I also think the value proposition is important. That's something I already touched on. But as hard as data governance is, and as challenging as it is nowadays, it's also important to do it right the first time, because we may not get a second chance. And so that requires us to think about an intentional strategic approach, how we're going to do this, but also like throughout the process, we need to celebrate the small wins. And that's what Jeff said. Like, if you have some innovation, you achieve something, you have to scream from the rooftop to let everybody know that you did this. Otherwise, people are not going to automatically assume that you achieved something. So celebrate the small wins along the journey. That will establish your credibility, but also just elicit more buy-in from stakeholders, and so you can have continue to have more funding, more people, and more time to do that what you need to do for the organization.
Yeah, I think my last point would just be like that. Data governance doesn't preclude innovation. It actually can help enable it. And I think that like there's just these old adages, right, about like Johnson & Johnson being such an excellent structured finance company and enabling their success, right? Creating some structure around your data and some standards, some aligned definitions, bringing all those silos together so they can talk to each other. That actually helps innovation, doesn't necessarily, preclude it, I guess. So that's some of what Wendy was saying, was making me just kind of bring that together.
Any final comments, Jeff?
I mean, you guys again like hit everything on the head, and I had to run outside just now to go talk to the sewer guy again. So I really missed the last like 4 minutes because my life is just a circus of chaos. Other than that, broccoli cheddar soup. That's what I got.
Love it. Well, I'm hungry. I know everybody else.
If you're interested, please feel free to find me, or who I assume anybody else on this, on LinkedIn. But I love the discussions, love talking about this stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, and check out Jeff on Clubhouse on Fridays at 11.
Yep.
All right.
Me and Bonnie Holub talk about AI to a growing group of people. Like, we have a little following now.
Exactly. So check out Jeff there. I posted everybody's LinkedIn profile in the chat, and really appreciate everybody's time and engagement. Love all the questions, and hope you found it valuable. And we'll turn it back over to you, G.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us from wherever you are, in the middle of housework, everything like that. Yeah, there's no shortage of online platforms. I forgot about Clubhouse. We're finding new ways to connect these days, I suppose. I got to get on there. So I think 5 minutes like last time, which will be around 10:53. So just, what is time anyway, right? Yeah, take a short bio break, and like before, feel free to keep the chat open, unmute, catch up if you want, or just go get a refill on that coffee. It is pretty amazing that we've been able to get. We had 44 people just a couple of minutes ago, which, for a virtual meeting, I think is pretty good. So thank you to everybody sticking with us. Yeah, we have a winner for the book. Congratulations, George.
Yeah, Scott here. George, just get us your email, or Eugene, if you have it, you can slide it to me. We'll get the publisher to send him a coupon and get a copy of the book.
Yeah. All right. Dale, how are you?
Mostly good, sir. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Great, great.
Give it another minute, but I can start.
Absolutely, yeah. Just give me the cue. I'm ready to go.
Okay. All right, it's about that time. Yeah. So Dale Ward, thank you for being our closing keynote today with DDC. And how do you pronounce the development corporation? Diné?
Diné.
Diné.
In our Navajo counterparts, Diné Development Corporation is a wholly owned by the Navajo people, and so I think it's pronounced more Diné, but that gets harder in conversation. So it's Diné Development Corporation.
Great. Yeah. No, that's. It's a rich history. Yeah, we've been actually outside my professional world working a little bit with some of the tribes on especially around the start of the pandemic, around some of the needs, like PPE and things like that. So that's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you hold multiple certifications: CMMI Institute, CDMP, ICCP, right?
Yes.
You are the strategic innovations lead over there at the net.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for going last. I know you never know which one is a blessing and which one is just, but yeah, if you wanted to mention anything else about yourself, and the topic is data governance and analytics enablement at scale. So all kind of just aligning with the theme of the morning.
Sure. I'm going to try to bring up the slides and share those.
Yeah, you should have permission.
How's that, Eugene?
Good.
Great. Toggle this over. Well, thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be a part of this great event and participate with my DAMA counterparts in Philadelphia. I'm a member of the Southwest Ohio chapter of DAMA. And many thanks to Anne-Marie Smith, who's a mentor, and we had recently connected, and Anne-Marie connected me with Eugene, and it's just a great opportunity. I want to thank Mr. Scott Taylor. That was a great presentation, and I'm definitely buying the book, and just appreciate so much the aspect of education that's so much a part of all of our jobs. And to our panelists, oh gosh, that was great, guys. Thank you so much. I just thoroughly enjoyed that and appreciate that conversation on innovation. And as much as, I've just within the last year taken on this role as strategic innovation lead for this company. And it's a very forward-thinking company. And Jeff, to your point, they're willing to put up the resources and the money to fully fund capability building and innovation on behalf of our own company and primarily on behalf of our clients. So very exciting for me to take on this new role. And John Tecce, thank you. Thank you, Alation, for sponsoring this. And John, I'll warn you ahead of time, there may be references in my presentation to competing products. And that's mostly not my fault that those products are there. And my funny story around that is working in the U.S. Air Force and working for the Air Force Chief Data Office. I worked with the Alation sales guys and trying to bring Alation into the Air Force Chief Data Office. And once that didn't work out, the gentleman that I worked with, I think, was depressed on that thought. And I took a moment to remind him of the complete and utter dysfunction of the U.S. Air Force when it comes to IT acquisition, and that the U.S. the Chief Data Office was not his only selling opportunity within the Air Force, that there would be hundreds of organizations elsewhere that would happily buy the product despite what the CDO was doing. So I think he was very encouraged. I need to reconnect with him. But as we get started this morning, I thought it appropriate to do a little bit of an introduction and ask the question, who am I? And it's a great question because you probably have no idea who I am. And despite that lack of notoriety, I have been around the IT and data space for some 25 plus years. As Eugene pointed out, I hold multiple certifications, from DAMA and CMMI on the DMM, ICCP, just passionate about all things data. I love digging into the nitty gritty of process capability, data management, process capability, maturity, and helping my clients navigate a roadmap toward targeted degrees of data management process capability maturity, and helping clients not abandon those journeys when they're distracted by any number of cool and sexy technologies and analytics, AI, ML, and things like that. And I've worked the bulk of my career in the defense consulting space, and primarily with Defense Logistics Agency and the US Air Force. I did spend a little bit of time working with LexisNexis as a master data architect within their Lexis Advanced platform. But I had a good 10 plus years at a big consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton. And for the last 2 years of my tenure, I was the lead solutions architect for the Air Force Chief Data Office. And, I probably had 3 big jobs in that context. Number one, I was responsible for developing a data management maturity model tailored for the US Air Force called the Data-Driven Performance Framework. I was also responsible for the development and co-authored the Air Force Data Services reference architecture that was signed out by the Acting Secretary of the Air Force back in March of 2019. You can go off and you can Google it, and you won't find my name anywhere on it. They don't do authors. So this accounts for my lack of notoriety. I was also, probably my biggest job was as the lead solutions architect for the Air Force CDO data analytics and data services platform. And that platform is really the product of a lot of innovation within the Air Force context, and designed to democratize access to modern governance enriched analytics data services capabilities that organizations didn't otherwise have access to in the Air Force. The Vault platform went on the next year in 2020 to win the Innovation in Government Award, and it was the only award awarded to the Air Force in 2020. So that was a rich, exhausting experience, and I'm excited now about my new role and dedicated to capability building and innovation, primarily in the data space. And when I get opportunities, I like to, write and speak at events like this, and I'm just so appreciative for that opportunity. So in keeping with the theme this morning, the title of the session, I want to break down a little bit: data governance and analytics enablement at scale. And, we've, our panelist, Wendy, offered up an excellent definition of data governance. And I obviously don't feel compelled as I break down these terms by means of an introduction. But I want to give a consulting perspective on this. And so, I've spent most of my years working with largely, some commercial, but largely Department of Defense clients. And so much of my time is spent educating. And, one of the mantras that we repeat for our clients in the space of data governance is that the business owns its data, right? And that's a revelation for most of our clients. That may not be a revelation for most everyone on the call. And in the military space, we wouldn't say the business necessarily, we would say the mission. The mission owns its data. It's not IT, obviously. And what we see so often with our DoD and federal clients is that the businesses responsibility and obligation towards its data is lost, they abdicate this responsibility. And the concept of ownership was such a big deal in the Air Force and educating the Air Force that when I started to get up to and working with the actual Chief Data Office, which is actually a new office within the Air Force, the Air Force ultimately had to sign, to publish signed guidance that the Air Force owns its data. And this is to overcome a great deal of dysfunction and provincial and territorial behaviors within the Air Force. And so, when I talk about data governance in the context of this session, that's classic data governance defined in the context of how Wendy shared it. But also for me, it's the full spectrum of data management disciplines, because the Air Force and those organizations kind of see that as one thing. So governance, along with all the other classic data management disciplines, whether it's master data management, metadata management, integration, interoperability, on and on and on. All of those things are very important goals for the Air Force that they're doing their best to understand. And it really does come down to getting the Air Force, in my case, in my most recent experience, but really for any organization, to manage data as a critical enterprise asset. And we talked about that earlier with the panelist. And when I try to explain that to my clients in a consulting context, I explained that data-driven organizations are one in which data assets are consistently and reliably leveraged to translate business strategy into positive, measurable mission outcomes. And managing data as a strategic asset within this context requires a fundamental shift of an organization's relationship with its data. And that's kind of how I speak to my clients, is helping them have a closer and develop a closer relationship with their data. Because as an organization's perceived increase in the value of their data increases, this almost instinctively leads to a closer and more nurturing relationship with its data. And that's what we want. It's really a behavioral change. And so many things that we'll talk about this morning really have to do with addressing the balance of governance and analytics enablement from a behavioral perspective, is really understanding the complex landscapes of your organizations or your clients' space and addressing those behavioral concerns. And in a military context, my speech around managing data as a critical enterprise asset gets easy, because I can quickly point to, if the asset was a weapon system, whether in an Air Force context, an Army, Marine Corps, if it's a weapon system, for example, they understand that. They understand what it means to manage a weapon system as an asset. So we wouldn't be surprised that around one of these weapon systems that we would find a wealth of resources dedicated to planning, acquisition, operations and maintenance, improvement, monitoring, disposal, on and on and on, dedicated to that asset. And we use this neat little infographic where we show asset management from a weapon system perspective and do direct mapping to, okay, these are all the same exact things that you need to do with respect to your data and change your relationship with that data. And, from that, help them to begin to understand what data management maturity looks like, and helping them understand where they're at from a process capability maturity and to where they want to get. And because, from my perspective, what I see consistently are organizations big and small trying to launch their own analytics initiatives absent of any type of governance or data management process capability maturity. And that kind of leads into the other part of the session title here, right? I was very deliberate in saying analytics enablement. And I was so glad that that came up. The concept of enablement came up, in the panelist session. Because let's face it, if you attended today's conference with an interest in that theme of balancing, data governance and analytics, you're probably not here to hear about doing analytics, right? It's about how do we enable analytics for our organizations, in my case, for my clients, and ensure that data governance is a big E part of that. And when I say big E, enterprise scoped enablement in that context. So, if we're to draw a straight line between exploitation of data and, business outcomes, this is where it's all starts. Then it's, our job or somebody's job to enable analytics with purpose, with intent, and with deliberation, carefully crafting the people, process, and technologies with all the appropriate hooks for data governance. And in creating those hooks and embedding data governance into the way that we do analytics, we do it in such a way that it's not just an extra job. It's not just a checkbox activity, that governance becomes a part of the critical path of the way that people do their work, and that it's a help, not a hindrance, right? And so we'll talk about that in the context of this presentation. Now, I added at scale, so data governance and analytics enablement at scale. And yeah, we like that phrase. We use that phrase, right? I like that phrase, but scale is relative. It means something different to everyone who uses it. And it's like, it's like saying big data, right? Big is relative. And so often our perception of scale is a function of your relationship to your organization, to your data, and to the organizational context in which you're working. And so I can't really quantify that any further in that context, but what I can do is give you my perception and my experience with scale. So in my role with the Air Force Chief Data Office and in my role with other large Air Force organizations, I can talk a little bit about what it looks like enabling analytics and data management programs in the Air Force at scale. So, the Air Force, you have over 700,000 employees, both active military, civilian, National Guard, et cetera. You've got over 5,000 aircraft and 400 ICBMs. You've got 60 installations worldwide. You have a $1.7 billion IT budget. And probably what's more relevant, to all of us is that within the Air Force, there are more than 3,000 registered IT investments. That's 3,000 different IT systems. And all of these systems have grown up over 60 plus years of largely ungoverned IT growth. And so you can imagine the silos that have been created. And it's further complicated by the fact that each IT system is encapsulated in a number of organizational, political, and contractual boundaries. And those contractual boundaries consist of, system integrators and software providers who are very jealous and very territorial about the work that they do. These systems are supported by a program management office, a functional management office, and these are government entities that are also very territorial and very protective of their systems. And the byproduct of that is that data sharing is really not in their historical DNA. And so you can understand, and so these system owners, so everything in the Air Force is very system centric. And so you can imagine that this concept of the business owning its data, the Air Force owning its data, is very foreign to them. And that's why they had to publish it as signed guidance. Back in 2007, I was the architect for data migration for a large ERP implementation within the Air Force. And so this involved about 500 different legacy logistics systems that they wanted to rip and replace with one bright, shiny new ERP. And, you know, that experience, and that happened probably nearly 15 years ago, that's forever shaped my perception of doing things at scale. And just the process of identifying authoritative data sources across those 500 systems for a given data object was just a massive undertaking. And so, you know, when we talk about analytics enablement at scale, identifying authoritative data sources within a smaller organization may be just, you know, knowledge that everybody has. At scale, that's a different process. And so there are teams and organizations dedicated to managing and mapping authoritative data sources to data assets across the Air Force. And the CDO picked up that responsibility, but in changing my perception, I knew that in being responsible for the Air Force data platform, that there were any number of procedural, technological, architectural, and behavioral considerations, you know, for this modern data platform development that we did within the Air Force CDO. And so the rest of the content this morning is really to share some of those considerations. I appreciated so much Scott Taylor's presentation, because it resonated with me at a level that is very near and dear to my heart, because as I've grown in my career and in my relationship with Department of Defense clients, I realized at some point that, you know, I had probably spent as much or more time educating clients on data management discipline and process capability maturity than I had, you know, developing or actually designing those the systems that we ultimately built for them. And that's a good thing. And I enjoy that part of the job. I enjoy that education piece. And as so many of you, you know, participating in the call and in the chat this morning have observed, you know, you really do have to make the business case for governance. You really do have to get the business and mission leaders bought into the need for governance. And so, you know, in my sphere, in relationship, you know, I don't know, I'll qualify it this way. I don't know if you have in your organizations, you know, an enterprise architecture discipline or modeling practice, but it's something interesting to look at if you're familiar with the process. This is what a lot of my customers understand. They understand enterprise architecture. I can't always say that they're great, that the Air Force organizations and DoD organizations are great at doing it, but it is something that they do, and they try very hard to scale appropriately. And so, you know, in making the case for business architecture, you know, I like to take those 4 essential business architecture layers and make the case for where data governance sits in those layers. And, you know, the realization is that whether or not your organization or your client has an enterprise architecture practice, there's one that exists, right? And modelers like to talk about, you know, modeling the as is enterprise architecture and the to be enterprise architecture, you know, looking at future state and, you know, understanding the layers and relationships between business architecture, data architecture, application architecture, technology architecture, right? It is crucial to, you know, understanding the big picture. I mean, if you talk about it just from a business architecture perspective and capability mappings and value stream analysis and things like that, for a lot of the folks that I've worked with, they sort of understand that, right? They understand that business process and business process architecture is where things get done, and they talk about and they initiate business process re-engineering efforts because they understand that, you know, inimitable business processes can, you know, create differentiators, can create competitive advantage and drive down costs and drive out efficiency. And, you know, what's ultimately that, you know, leadership needs to understand is that data is the payload of business process, right? And that data governance really is an expression of business and mission strategy in the medium of data, right? The business owns its data, and data governance is the ability for the business, for the mission owners to express their strategic goals, their mission outcomes in the medium of data. And it's in that layer between business architecture and data architecture that, you know, data governance stands in that gap, and why it's so important to have a handle and be able to actively manage your data as an enterprise asset. So, you know, there's any number of pain points that come out of these discussions. You know, in the Air Force, this is some samples I pulled from older slides where the Air Force talks about, you know, large number of legacy systems with proliferation of point-to-point interfaces, antiquated brittle architectures that create data jails for so many of the high value analytics targets that exist across the Air Force community. And it's compelling the number of challenges associated with data management and the need for data management maturity and data governance within the Air Force. And so when we talk about all of these things, when we're educating our clients, right, it's important to view these challenges in the context of the full functional scope of enterprise data management disciplines and the need to achieve targeted degrees of EDM process capability maturity. Because, you know, if you look at the little wheel I have in that picture, right, it's a Dimbachish type wheel that we put together for our clients. And, you know, data analytics is just one piece of that, right? And when you begin to explain the relationships, right, between those pieces, I created this chart a few years ago, and I probably used it 100 times, you know, just to explain the important relationships that if you're wanting to achieve effective data analytics within your company and harvest the tactical and strategic and operational insights that you need to harvest, then there are important relationships that exist with all these other data management disciplines, including, you know, specifically data governance, right? So what clients often understand is that harvesting, exploiting their organizational data assets and harvesting from them strategic and tactical and operational insights, and then connecting those analytics insights with decision makers at the speed of relevance, that's something that they understand. That's something that I can say and that yes, that's what I want to do. And what we add to that is the ability to connect those insights, those analytic insights with decision makers and be able to sustain and scale that over time requires higher and higher degrees of data governance, data management discipline, and the process capability maturity that we define in DMM and other places, right? And that's the hook, right? Then they look at this chart and we hear the explanation, and so they start to understand the relationship, and that if we're going to enable analytics, we need to enable all of these other things, and not just enablement for the scope of the platform, the data platform, but it really has to be an extension and a piece and part of the larger big E enterprise data governance, metadata solutions, cataloging solutions, et cetera. So, and I can tell you that as effective as that messaging can be, we rarely get to lead with that, right? Because so many client organizations are distracted by and attracted to the promise of AI, the promise of ML, the cool technologies and the cool tools that they can go buy. Because if they know how to do anything, they know how to acquire stuff, right? And the IT acquisition model within the Air Force and within the DoD gives different organizations this spending authority, and they can just go buy stuff. So the perception is that I can just go buy solutions to my problems. And so we have to be able to pitch and catch, we have to be able to talk that, and we have to be able to execute on that. But just as quickly, we have to bring along the governance and bring along the data management discipline and make that strong case that you're not going to get very far with analytics enablement if you're not doing all of this. And so it's interesting at that level because, and I've been surprised by the level of customer buy-in. I've only had one other experience, maybe two, depending on how you count it, where a DoD organization came to us and said, hey, we want to stand up a data management office and we want to achieve level 3 maturity on the SCI CMM scale. It's like, wow, really? That's awesome. You sure? Do you want to do some analytics? Do you want to do something cool? No, okay, yeah, let's do that. So it's been an interesting journey. Check on my notes here. So, we've talked a lot this morning about innovation, and I so appreciate that, especially given my new role within DDC. And it's really that concept. We talked a little bit about perceived novelty. So in DoD organizations, you can count on the fact that these organizations from an IT perspective are typically, 5, 10 plus years behind what industry's doing, right? So if you're able to, as a consultant, as a system integrator, able to package up these technologies and these innovations and make them fit the very unique and difficult client landscape within a DoD organization, that's innovation for them. It might be 10 years old, but that's innovation for them. And so in some of the things that I'm sharing with you this morning, I have no pretensions about the sophistication or the novelty of the things that I'm going to share with you, but I can share with you that, from an Air Force perspective, especially when we're talking about the Vault platform that I worked on for the CDO, it was revolutionary, right? So, and in that discussion of embedding data governance and analytics enablement, it all begins from a platform perspective with your solution architecture. So again, and what I'm sharing with you is a very simple picture that I put together for the Undersecretary of the Air Force try to convey what this concept of the Vault platform and what we were calling at the time a data lab environment would look like. And, you know, from a goals perspective, well, sorry about that. You know, from a goals perspective, one of the essential aspects beyond just the governance, and we'll talk about the governance, was to build an analytics and data services platform. And I'm very specific about saying data services, and as much as those data services encompass other data management disciplines. So we wanted to not just enable analytics, but we also wanted to enable data quality assessment and remediation capabilities into the platform, right? And be very deliberate and intentful about that. But overall, the goal was to democratize access to a core suite of analytics capabilities and organizational data that was not otherwise available to many Air Force organizations. The goal was to lower the barriers to entry, make it easy to access the platform, reduce the risk to the users of the platform, such that they would think twice, such that not only could they come and use these tools in the context of a data lab, but it would cause these other Air Force organizations to think twice about building their own data platforms. So, as you might imagine, there are currently many, and the number is not known, data platform development initiatives within the Air Force. And it's because of those provincial, territorial types of behaviors and organizations with spending authority that can simply just go out and try to build their own, buy a product, whatever. And so to really, the CDO, the newly appointed CDO back a couple years ago, you know, she was a 2-star general. Her goal was to, you know, lower the barriers to entry for the CDO to create a data platform that would lower those barriers to entry, that would reduce the risk to organizations, and it would create an essential gravity that would cause these other organizations to say, why wouldn't we just go use this opportunity? And that was a very effective message. You know, one of the other goals was to free the government from vendor and system integrator lock-in, such that the government was not ultimately handcuffed to a proprietary solution and providers with that bake proprietary methodologies or whatever into their solutions that they're selling to the government. So the government's starting to wake up and growing weary of being handcuffed. And so the goal was to build the core analytics capabilities, at least, with 100% cloud native and open source technologies, and really present a new value proposition to the Air Force, to its users, and to lower the costs, and at the same time create an evolutionary adaptive architecture. And, you know, it really became a case study, and we chatting a little bit about Clayton Christensen during the panelist session, because that's, when I think about this effort, it really was the Clayton Christensen disruption model, because we didn't build the coolest, most sophisticated, sexiest data analytics platform. It was a collection of genuinely cloud native and open source technologies that come together and would perform just about any type of analytics that a tenant organization would want to perform. Wasn't the coolest, wasn't the prettiest, but it would do the work. It was a workhorse. And so we created that access. We made it easy to access, you know, such that, again, we created our own gravity and caused other Air Force organizations to think twice about, you know, creating their own solutions. The other important aspect of this architecture that you can see in the picture is is making the architecture multi-tenant. So leveraging the infrastructure automation and the elasticity of the cloud, we're able to, provide tenant teams with a dedicated suite of tools and dedicated storage, and essentially create for them their own little lab. And when a team or an individual signed up, within 30 minutes, we could spin up their own set of tools, allocate their storage from a object store technology. We were in AWS GovCloud, so it was S3 object store technology. And they were given access to the metadata governance cataloging layer that you see there in the middle, which is the Air Force CDO Enterprise Information Model. And we granted tenants tremendous autonomy, right? And this is one of those behavioral considerations that we knew would have to be in place in order to promote adoption. So we granted them tremendous opportunity with respect to scaling of their environment, right? So if they wanted 30 nodes versus 300 nodes or whatever they needed, they were allowed to do that. Unlimited storage from a sandbox perspective, read-only access to the larger data lake. They were granted a lot of autonomy with respect to the types of data product development activities that they would undertake. And this could be anything from pure analytics, AI, ML, statistical models, or other types of activities where it's legacy data cleansing initiatives, data preparation for migration for ERP implementations, COTS implementations, things like that. And probably most importantly is that they were granted the opportunity to acquire and work with their own data sets if the data assets that they needed weren't otherwise available in the data lake. And probably across the Air Force, you look at any other type data platform, no one was granted this opportunity. So we knew that day one, we would not have the data lake populated with all the authoritative data sources from the span of 3,000 systems. It just wasn't going to happen. And so we gave them the latitude to bring their own data sets and work with those data sets. And in granting that level of autonomy, we also made sure that the experience was as cost effective as possible. So tenant teams could come and use their lab environment, and they could use it for 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 years, with no commitment one way or another. And they never have to worry about the management of the infrastructure, backups, patching, et cetera, et cetera. So they could use a data lab environment and walk away when they're done. In fact, the only cost that the tenant would ostensibly incur would be just the hourly compute rate of the compute layer technologies, right? So the Spark and the AWS EMR, NiFi, and other tools that they're given access to. And they were given a button in their user interface where if they were going to take a couple weeks break or go on vacation, that they could click that button and shut down all of their compute layer resources and realize those cost savings. The other important aspect from an innovation and scalability perspective, the architecture was built, the platform was built enforcing a strict decoupling of compute and store. So if you kind of look at the picture and you see 3 layers, right? A compute layer across the top with tenant teams and their data lab environments, their tenant instances, a bottom layer of storage, which is the CDO data lake, and that's AWS S3 technology and GovCloud. And that middle layer being that metadata layer that I mentioned earlier. So the approach here is to have a dedicated suite of tools spun up in the compute layer in which data is never persisted. So in that top layer, we're never persisting data. Then you have a dedicated storage layer wherein the data is persisted using service referenceable object store technology, the S3 buckets, wherein the data sets stored there are always are required to be, and this wasn't difficult to achieve, stored in open, non-proprietary, self-describing file formats. This is the classic CSV files and XML files and JSON files, Parquet, Avro, ORC, etc. So this meant that we could evolve that compute layer, evolve the technologies used in the compute layer, and never have to worry about the remapping, reformatting, and migration of data to a new tool or solution. And that's the type of experience you would classically have, like with a relational database technology, and something, a decoupling that you can't achieve even with the use of Hadoop. So we deliberately don't use Hadoop to main this strict decoupling of compute and store. This also allowed our tenants to do that shutdown that I mentioned, right? They could cost savings, so they could shut that down knowing their data was perfectly safe, sitting in their S3 buckets and within the data lake. And it allows us to scale everything very independently. The storage layer, the compute layer, the tools within a tenant space, all of it. And so over time, that would enable us to begin to look at how we federate our architectures, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So that mid layer, that metadata layer in the middle, that's called the enterprise information model, is really a robust layer, a robust metadata layer and metadata services bus that served essentially as really the connective tissue between those layers of compute and store, serving both to facilitate embedded data governance activities and provide the lens through which tenant teams viewed and understood the data assets in the lake. And we'll talk more about that. So all of this, so the more activity, so I can say that the effect of this overall model was very successful. And we immediately begin drawing tenant teams and individual users to the platforms, realizing kind of the ease of access and the lowered barriers to entry, that they could come, experiment, and fail fast and have no commitment. So the adoption rate is such now that we even have non-Air Force users using the platform. The F-35 Joint Program Office has about 7 different tenant instances in the platform. And I think by last count, there were 500 or 600 individual users on the platform. And we started to see where we were taking away work and we were getting individual initiatives to stop and think twice about building their own data platform. And so in that regard, the model was very successful. And and driving activity to the platform was very important from a big E enterprise data governance perspective, because as we'll see, this activity coupled with embedded and sometimes automated data governance hooks, serves to achieve that balance that we're talking about here this morning. So essential to all this is a discussion of data lake organization and looking at embedded governance in the context of what effectively is a data curation methodology. So any of you that are working with data lakes and data lake architectures and modern data platforms, this is a not surprising collection of data lake zones that we've defined for the ultimate organization of the lake. But the very purposeful way that we characterized these data lake zones was to achieve targeted degrees of data curation practices and achieve a trust level, a specific trust level of the data that is available on the platform. And so there's a trust scoring model involved in measuring the relative degree to which data is curated.
Okay, see you later.
Keep in mind that, as we walk through this, that, Air Force data exists in silos across a landscape of about 3,000 IT systems. The data acquisition activities required to populate the lake are difficult, slow, and costly. As a result, building a single persistent interface, whether that's FTP or an API call or whatever it is very costly. It draws a lot of security considerations and accreditation processes and things like that. So it's not a trivial thing to get data into the lake. Acquired data is dirty, and any supporting metadata is often difficult to find or acquire. And an enterprise-wide Air Force business glossary or information asset catalog is not populated. I can say one exists now, at least from a CDO perspective, but it's not populated. So, from a DAMA fundamentals of data management perspective, you're really starting with zero. And so, again, a lot of the goals of the platform was to help us not only achieve analytics enablement, but also begin the process of doing enterprise data governance and data management fundamentals. Building a data glossary, right? For example, that the Air Force doesn't have. So one of the goals of the platform is to leverage, in that regard, is to leverage tenant activity on the platform, embed those governance hooks, and begin to crowdsource both the population of the lake from a data perspective and the population of the metadata repositories. Obviously, the other, like we talked about, is to enable the analytics so that we're providing cleansed, fit for use organizational data assets to fuel data product development efforts. So, real quickly on the zones, the transient zone, just like it says, and I'm going to skip over some of this for the purposes of time. This is where data touches down. This is where things are unzipped and merged files are split or merged. Split files are merged together. We begin our provenance. We begin our meta tagging. We begin our cataloging here. But the transient zone is just that. It's the initial landing point for data inbound to the lake. The raw zone is where data is organized, cataloged, uncompressed, unbundled, and what's important about the raw zone from an analytics enablement perspective, and what we do differently probably than most other data platforms, is that we make sure that the data in the raw zone is properly organized and accessible to data engineers and data scientists that need the data right now. And I would love to be able to say that, we were going to fully curate a data asset before we make it available in a trusted state to consumers, prospective consumers of the data. But the reality is that's just not going to happen. So it's just as likely in our setting that, the Secretary of Defense will call for a readiness study and insist that that be done in 60 days. And then all the data needs to be acquired and the analytics run and the reports produced and the visualizations produced without the benefit of the data being fully curated in the context of the platform. So we in no way wanted to inhibit or be dogmatic about access to uncurated data. But what we do is that from a cataloging and exposure perspective, we make sure that consumers understand the risk that they have to buy down in consuming that uncurated, untrusted data from the raw zone. And that has actually served us well. And it's helped, the consumption of that data has actually helped fuel further efforts to really get on the ball and curate and get data into a trusted state that's fit for use and fit for purpose for other data product development activities. And so, you know, curating that data, we have a very deliberate methodology for data curation, and we have a trust scoring model that serves both to help consumers of the data and our data stewards begin to do all the proper data governance activities. So on one hand, enabling analytics, on the other hand, collaborating with data stewards as the data comes into the platform to get those assets registered, cataloged, contextualized, on and on and on. But that trust scoring model essentially looks like this. So trust goes from 0 to 100%, and you achieve different degrees, different percentage points based on activities performed. So if you have a validated schema and that's applied to the data, in other words, I understand the structure of the data from the authoritative source, and if I applied that schema and I've rendered it like into a Hive table, then you get 10% trust. If that data is further statistically profiled and we're able to version and capture those profiles, statistical profiles over time, that's another 10%. And what we did from a platform automation perspective is that as you ingest from the raw zone into the trusted zone, these two activities automatically happen with a little bit of human insight and validation from a data dictionary or metadata perspective. But with those two things, we can say that the data is, the schema has been validated, it's been statistically profiled, that's a minimal degree of trust, we're at 20%. The next big leaps in data curation and achieving a trust score is a question of metadata alignment. So can I, from this physical data asset in a specific column that I see in its structure, map that up into my business metadata layer and map that to a specific glossary term and find and identify business rules associated with that term. And these would essentially become data quality business rules. I get another 10% by identifying the authoritative data status of that physical data asset. Which source system did that data asset come from? And was that source system authoritative, or was it simply merely holding a purpose copy? That gets me another 10%. If I can take those business rules and apply technical validation rules and apply the business validation rules, that gets me to 100%. And understand what's happening there is that we're assessing the data quality both from a technical and business perspective of that data asset. But in the trusted zone, what's very important to keep in mind is that we're never changing the structure or the content of the data. We're curating it to the point where we understand, where we're promoting visibility of the state of that data, right? So making it fit for use. So I'm not going to make any assumptions on the behalf of a data scientist who wants to come consume legacy system data. The best I can do is highlight and promote visibility to say, yeah, based on legacy business rules, there are 30,000 records that are clean and 70,000 that are dirty. You can make a business decision about how that impacts your data product development, your analytics, that types of thing. If you want to cleanse that data, then that cleansed data, you would then migrate, you're changing the content, so you're moving that to the curated zone. So the curated zone is the home data that's been transformed fit for purpose. And that can be the result of data preparation for migration, data quality cleansing, analytics efforts, analytics result sets, things like that. Because again, it's not all just about analytics. That's a big part of it, and that's the big draw to the platform, but we're also providing other data facilities to promote other data management disciplines and activities like data quality assessment and remediation, master data management, things like that. So it all goes to this notion of embedded governance. And I'll kind of move through this quickly, as I know we're getting toward the top of the hour, but when you think about that metadata layer and the metadata solution within a data platform solution, the essential requirement for us was that that metadata and cataloging solution was not merely platform scoped. It had to be the data governance and cataloging solution for the Air Force enterprise, right? And we had to explain that to Air Force leadership and the chief data officer many times to understand, yeah, we're doing all this at the same time, but the data governance and metadata solution would have to exist regardless of whether we had a data platform, right? Because you have an obligation to go help and do all your data management fundamentals of building a business glossary, an information asset catalog, accumulating all the data standards, policies, logical data models, et cetera, right? So this had to exist regardless of the data platform, but in the context of the data platform, it serves as that connective tissue between the layers of compute and store. It serves as the lens, and it creates the embedded hooks in the way that we do data curation. And the second big requirement is, because all this was true, it had to provide independent layers of business metadata and technical metadata. And that sounds easy, but as you look at a lot of different solutions, and I'm sure John can talk to this and attest to this, that sometimes when you look at cataloging solutions, they're cataloging physical data assets, and then kind of the business context is a tack onto that. Which, from a data governance perspective, what you need are two independent layers of technical and business metadata, and you need to be able to create the linkage right between those layers. So if I have a physical data asset and I have a specific column, I should be able to have the linearity in the metadata to draw a line up to a term in the business glossary, right? And the business rules associated with that term, or the data standards or security policies associated with that term. And so you end up with this big one-to-many relationship between business metadata. I have item data defined in my business metadata layer, and then I have, probably in the Air Force, there's probably 500 different instantiations of item data across hundreds of different IT systems, of which only a few are actually authoritative. So you can quickly begin to see where you have master data management issues, because you see all these other systems storing copies of purpose copies of item data, but not authoritative for that data. So, but ultimately, when we're talking about analytics, and my analytics consumer, my data scientist, walks up to this data within the lake, the real need is to provide them the essential business context of that data. What business processes is this data locked? How is this functionally defined? How is this data element defined and used by the business community? What are the business rules that the functional community, the business community, has established around this data, right? To have that essential business context to produce more reliable and accurate data analytics results. So ensuring that data is fit for use from an analytics perspective, that's the real role that we see with this metadata layer. And so you can ignore the bulk of this picture, but in having all that in place, we're leveraging the fact that we have all of this tenant activity on the platform, and we're taking advantage of the fact that tenants are bringing their own data assets to the platform, right? And so they can bring their own data assets to the platform, but there's no expectation of privacy, right? We're cataloging, we're constantly cataloging, and we have this metadata service bus implementation, and we're constantly cataloging the data assets that tenants bring into their sandbox buckets. And then that's getting pushed into the catalog. Data stewards are looking at, and they're taking that from a platform perspective. Number one is a demand signal. So in a larger Air Force marketplace for high value, high demand data assets, our tenants are providing us those demand signals, right? And so that causes a couple of different things to happen. That triggers at least two different things. Number one, it triggers that data asset to be looked at from a acquisition perspective. Hey, we have X number of tenants that are bringing these data assets, specific data assets to the platform. Let's prioritize the acquisition of that data, bringing that into the publish lake, building the persistent interfaces required to keep that data fresh in the lake, because that's no menial thing. And so if we can prioritize, if we can understand the demand of data through the activity of our tenants, then we can prioritize the population of the lake. At the same time, as this metadata is pushed up into the technical metadata layer that we talked about earlier, right? Then data stewards are seeing that, and they're going to look and saying, hey, can I create the linkage between this data asset that the tenant brought in and the business metadata? And maybe that business metadata is not there. So that creates workload, right? And so we're getting the benefit of that prioritization of these market demand signals for data, and we're both populating the lake, and we're also doing the proper data governance things of getting that governance repository populated and our critical data assets registered. So in closing, I wanted to point to one last example, and I think Alison brought this up during the panel discussion, and that is the use of a platform reference architecture. So part of my job was to take the goodness of the platform that we had developed and distill that down into a set of blueprints, a set of architectural guidelines, such that if other Air Force organizations insisted that they go build their own data platforms and not use the CDO platform, then our instruction, we handed them this reference architecture and said, please use this set of blueprints and this set of architectural guidelines to implement your solution, with the goal of, in an end state, achieving platform interoperability and data interoperability. So the data services reference architecture, for example, says that thou shalt use strict decoupling of compute and store. Your data assets should only be stored in open file formats and available through an object service referenceable object store technology. What does that do? In an end state, that ensures that their data lake, our data lake, everybody else's data lake, that in an end state that we can federate, that we can virtualize, that we can bring together, because they're all, basically one web service call away. And there's any number of pieces of guidance. There's a lot of design patterns. We have four capability layers with the microservices and value-added services overlay across those capability layers that really pins down the ultimate design patterns for how you build a data platform and ensure that all data platform development across the Air Force, in this case, is occurring along a common vector. So with that, I know it's a little bit over the top of the hour, and I thank everybody for their patience and indulging me in this little journey through analytics enablement at scale with data governance properly embedded. Eugene, I defer to you, and if there's an opportunity for questions or folks need to drop off, I completely understand.
I think we had one question in the chat that does all data move through each of the zones, or might certain data stay in a certain zone if there isn't a business need for it to be fully curated?
Correct. So over time, the goal would be to get all legacy data, all source system data to the trusted zone, right? To where we are promoting access and visibility to the health, complexion, and business context of that data. Whether those data sets are ultimately consumed and transformed and end up in the curated zone, that's a product of, who needs what over time. That data would stay for a long time in the raw zone is a product of just the sheer lack of resources and data stewards and the people required across some of these 3,000 IT systems to invest in that data.
Thank you. Okay. One quick call for any more questions. Seeing none. All right. Yeah, I think this will wrap it up for us today. I'll let everybody get on to lunch. Look forward to providing that again in person in the near future. Dale, thank you so much for joining us today. This is great. I sort of picture myself going into, I picture typical person going into a store, a warehouse or home appliance kind of store, looking around all the products that are there on the shelves. And you stop someone and you say, can you describe this for me? Where's it made? How does it compare with the others? And then, the person can have a blank look, or they can be able to tell you more about it. And you're the customer, you're the data user, I guess. This is the analogy here. And this is, you're curating the products. You have to be able to explain them.
Absolutely.
Hopefully they're on the shelf because you also vetted, where they're coming from. Yeah. So that was what was going through my head.
Yeah. As a data management professional, steeped in all things DAMA, right? It's a frustrating life to live because you can't do things properly in order. You have to, you're inheriting 60 years of ungoverned IT development in silos and very territorial provincial behaviors and a lot of politics involved. And so you just find disruptive, innovative ways to, at least start moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you pretty much read my T-shirt here. Yes. So with that, yeah, thank you again, and thank you everybody for sticking with us. And for anybody who had to drop off early, this hopefully will get posted out there so they can catch up in the last 5 or 10 minutes. So thank you again, and with that, see everybody June 30th, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thanks.